Hello guys, this is your fanfic dojo and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Sage Naruto Fell in Love with Tayuya Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. Brother, Naruto started, my name is Naruto, and I am here to help you. How could you possibly help me? I am nothing but a demon to this village, spat Gaara as he remembered all of the times he was nearly assassinated. The sand around Gaara's feet began to move around wildly, lashing out occasionally. Naruto sensed the growing rage inside the red head and quickly closed the gap between them and placed a hand on Gaara's shoulder. Brother, you have to calm down. I know what it's like, all the pain you've suffered, and all of the hate you have felt, but you mustn't let it consume you, brother. You are stronger than they are. Do not become the demon they see you as, become something you can be proud of. Naruto's words seemed to have an instant effect on the Aikibi Jinchuriki. The sand around the two began to calm down and slowly lower itself back to the ground. Taking a step back from his fellow Jinchuriki, Naruto continued in a much softer and more understanding tone. I can help you, brother. I can help free you from this nightmare of a village, but to do that you have to trust me. Gaara looked into Naruto's eyes again and saw the same understanding he had seen before. That was the clincher for Gaara. He knew that whatever this person had to say, he would listen. I trust you. My name is Gaara, and I am the youngest child of the Yondaime Kazekage. Naruto's eyes widened slightly at this little piece of information. Well, this complicates things a little, Naruto thought. No kidding, Kit. If he is the son of the cage, getting him out of the village will be more difficult than any of us previously thought, said Kurama, causing Naruto nod in agreement. Kit, place your hand on his head. I wish to speak with my little brother. Naruto inwardly nodded once again before returning his attention to Gaara. It's a pleasure to officially meet you, Gaara. Now I believe Kurama has something he wants to talk to Shukaku about. With that, Naruto stepped forward and placed his right hand on Gaara's head, and before the red head could react, the two boys found themselves in the middle of a white expanse. Where are we? Asked Gaara as he looked around. All he could see was white that seemed to go on with no end in sight. The boys turned their attention at the sound of a deep and slightly crazed voice. We are in a plane that exists outside of the human realm, a place that only Biju and Jinchuriki can enter. Behind Gaara was none other than the Aikibi no Shukaku himself. His sandy brown fur was accentuated by the dark blue vein-like markings that crisscrossed all over his body. His jagged, concave mouth was pressed into a frown as he watched something behind Naruto, his star-like pupil with dots surrounding it spinning wildly. Why have you brought us here, Kurama? Said Shukaku, his annoyance clear in his deep voice. Now Shukaku, that's no way to greet your eldest brother after all these years, said Kurama from behind Naruto, his slitted eyes staring into Shukaku's with no fear. Shukaku's frown deepened at his brother's remark but held his tongue. But seeing as your temper is building, I guess we should get down to business. Shukaku, I have been visited by our father. The Tanuki's eyes widened in shock as he continued to listen. He told me of a great evil hiding in this world and he wants us to stop it. But the only way that we even stand a chance against this evil is for the 9 Jinchuriki and Biju to fight as one. Brother, our father has put his trust in us to protect this world as he once did long ago. So I ask you, Shukaku, will you fight alongside us? Fight to protect this world and fight to uphold our father's legacy. Shukaku smirked as he answered, yes, I will fight alongside you, brother. I knew that one day our father would call on us. That is why I was always the most battle-crazed of us. I was training and preparing for the day we would be called upon. Kurama smirked at his youngest brother. Nothing ever seemed to truly surprise the Tanuki. So when do we leave? That is actually up to the kid and his sensei, said Kurama, turning his gaze down to the two confused Jinchuriki. So kid, when are we leaving? Naruto thought for a moment before answering. Tonight, once I tell Jiraiya sensei what happened, and after he's done ranting about me ignoring his instructions, we'll come pick Gaara up and sneak out of the village. The other three beings in the white expanse nodded in agreement. Now that that's decided, let's get back to our world and put our plans into motion. Shukaku, until my sensei can repair the seal that is holding you inside of Gaara, I need you to restrain yourself and your power. The last thing we need right now is Gaara going into a rage if someone angers him. Shukaku pouted slightly at having to hold in his power instead of letting it run rampant like he was used to, but nodded in understanding. Good, now let's head back, and no sooner had Naruto finished, the two boys found themselves once again inside of Gaara's sand dome. I guess I shall see you tonight, brother, said Gaara, slightly disappointed at having to separate from his first true friend and brother. Naruto sensed Gaara's disappointment and placed a comforting hand on the redhead's shoulder. Don't worry, Gaara, we shall see each other again soon, I promise. Gather whatever belongings you wish to bring with you and wait for us atop the highest balcony in the village. We'll find you and we'll make our escape from this hell of a village, Naruto said in a soothing voice that eased Gaara's worries. Giving each other one final nod, Gaara dropped the sand dome around them and the two took off in different directions, not wanting to attract attention. Sunagakure Kage's office. Yoshimaru stood before his leader and brother-in-law, a strange sense of dread building in the pit of his stomach. Sitting at his desk, the Kage had an emotionless mask on his face, making it impossible to tell what he was feeling or thinking. This only served to increase the feeling of dread Yoshimaru had. No matter what, he had always been able to read his brother-in-law like a book no matter how hard he tried to hide it. For him to not be able to read anything off of him was setting off warning bells inside his head. Yoshimaru, I have a mission for you, said the Kage as he slowly rose from his seat and turned to look at his village. Yoshimaru slowly walked to stand at his right side, his eyes glancing over at the park where Gaara had encountered Naruto. What is it, Kage-sama? He asked in a neutral voice, hiding his growing dread. The Kage sighed heavily as he turned to look at his right-hand man, knowing how much this was going to kill him inside. This is an S-rank assassination mission. You are to kill the target by any means necessary, do you understand? Hi, Kage-sama, who is the target? Deep inside though, he already knew who he was supposed to kill and it was taking every ounce of his shinobi training to not lash out and refuse. Your target is Gaara, your mission begins tonight. Yoshimaru had to force himself to reply with all of the emotions he was feeling. Hi, Kage-sama. The Kage sighed as he watched his brother-in-law's reflection leave his office. Karura-chan, forgive me for this sin, but it is in village's best interest that Gaara be killed, thought the Kage as he gazed at the clear sky hanging overhead. With Naruto, once again under his transformation, was walking through the streets of Sunagakure with his head swerving left and right. Damn it, sensei, the least you could have done was tell me where the hell you were meeting that spy at. Cursed Naruto as he continued search the streets. After another hour of fruitless searching, Naruto was seriously considering just finding Gaara and making a break for it. Kid, did you forget that thanks to your perfect chakra control you can sense other chakra signatures? Naruto stopped mid-step and had to resist the urge to slap himself. How the hell had he forgotten that? Thanks, Kurama, thought Naruto as he closed his eyes and concentrated on the chakra signatures around him. He was surprised when he felt many of the chakra signatures coming from passing Suna ninja. Many of the Chunin and Junin had chakra reserves that were barely acceptable for their rank. A Chunin that walked by him had especially low reserves that were about the same as a Konoha genin. No wonder Konoha is known as the strongest of the five. These ninja could probably barely hold their own against Konoha's elite Chunin. No kidding, Kit. Even you could probably fight most of these ninja and win one-on-one. Maybe, but back to business, got to find Jiraiya-sensei. With that, Naruto once again began to focus and extended his range as best he could. It took him a couple of minutes, but he finally found Jiraiya a couple of blocks away from him, that wasn't too hard. Jiraiya-sensei has by far the largest chakra reserves inside of this village. With a direction in mind, Naruto set off at a mild jog towards where he felt his sensei's chakra signature. Konohagakure no Sato Hokage Tower. The Sandaime Hokage looked over his village with a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Ever since Naruto's escape from the village, things had taken a drastic change from the norm. The once friendly and welcoming atmosphere that seemed to radiate from the very foundations of the village itself had been replaced by one of dread and intimidation. The civilians of the village, though, seemed almost blind to the change, still going about their daily lives. The shinobi, on the other hand, were a different story. In earlier years, the shinobi of the village had been like the civilians, easygoing and only relying on their training for missions and when called upon. Now, though, they were constantly on alert, almost as if they were expecting an invasion at any moment. This was due to the Sandaime's decree of what had happened during the incident with Naruto. The civilians were outraged and had called for the Hokage to have the boy be tracked down and killed for his crimes. The shinobi had been in shock at the fact that Naruto was the heir of the Sage of the Six Paths, the very man who taught their ancestors the ways of chakra. Needless to say, the civilians' cries were silenced when all of the ninja in the village sided with the Hokage. Not even the ignorant civilian council members were stupid enough to argue when they had an entire village of ninja opposing them. Now, with a more militaristic outlook, Sarutobi had ordered each and every one of his ninja to train themselves to the limit, and train they did. Genin were easily Chunin level by any other village's standards, while their Chunin looked more like Junin, and their Junin could defeat an entire squad of Anbu from another village. The Hokage himself had even begun his own training, quickly regaining the right to call himself the God of Shinobi. The academy was not spared from the increased training either. Once he and his advisors had looked at the academy curriculum, the Sandaime couldn't change it fast enough. While they had retained some of the classes and lessons such as history, chakra theory and tactics, they had also incorporated much more to the academy curriculum. Children still began the academy at 6 years of age, but instead of slowly getting them used to what they were learning, they were thrown into it headfirst. For the first 2 years there, children were taught mostly general things such as taijutsu, history, basic tactics, basic chakra control, and how to use tools like shuriken and kunai properly. However, they also introduced them to other areas of ninja specialties such as kenjutsu, genjutsu, medical ninjutsu, tracking, and advanced ninjutsu. At the end of their second year, students were given the original graduation exam to see if they were ready to move on. Starting their third year, students were given the choice between 5 different fields to continue their education in: medical ninja, assassination, heavy assault, sensory and tracking, or intelligence. Sarutobi had taken Tsunade's original idea for having a specialized combat medic corps and taken it to the next level. By introducing students to these fields early on in their education, it allowed them to discover what would best suit them and helped increase their numbers in the areas. Each unique field also branched off into the other fields slightly to help improve the quality of students and give them some variety in terms of skill. Those who went into the medical field were also trained in sensing out even the faintest of chakra signatures to help save more lives. They were also trained slightly in assault. An enemy would always target the medic first so they couldn't help heal their teammates, so to give field medics a better chance they were trained extensively in taijutsu and some ninjutsu. The ones that continued in assassination were trained to the extreme in stealth. They also studied in the medical field on the anatomy of the human body so that they could kill their target quickly and efficiently. On top of that, they were trained in tracking so they could find their targets quickly and eliminate them before they had a chance to become a larger threat. Heavy assault students were trained mainly in taijutsu, kenjutsu, ninjutsu, and other skills that could help them in combat. They were trained slightly in medical ninjutsu so that if anything were to happen to them, they would be able to at least patch themselves up enough until they received treatment. Those that went into sensory and tracking were, for obvious reasons, trained to track down their targets and restrain or eliminate them. To accomplish that, they were also trained highly in assault so they could hold their own in a fight against their opponents. The branch off of this field was the sensory field, where students trained in homeland defense and protection. The ones that followed this path usually joined the barrier team that helped to watch over and maintain the village's security. The intelligence field mainly focused around getting information out of an enemy or prisoner by any means necessary. This often led students to join the torture and interrogation corps of the Anbu after they had graduated and had been promoted. Sarutobi was pulled from his thoughts by a knock on his door. Sitting down in his seat behind his desk, Sarutobi cleared his throat before speaking in a commanding voice, "Enter." The door opened to reveal his one-time rival and best friend, Danzo Shimura. "Ah, Danzo, what do you have to report?" Danzo spoke in his standard monotone. "The team you sent to the temple in the land of mountains to conduct further research has returned. They report that other than a few scrolls containing jutsu taught at the temple, there was nothing else of interest or that was related to the Sage of the Six Paths." The Sandaime couldn't completely hide his disappointment at this, but he got over it quickly before moving on. "What about that other mission?" the Sandaime asked as he signaled his Anbu guards to leave. Danzo spoke up once they were alone. "Unfortunately, not as well as we had hoped, Hokage-sama. Kumo's security was tighter than we had anticipated, but my route team was able to bring back a few things of value as well as one of the main targets." With that, the old war hawk pulled out a sealing scroll and placed it on the desk in front of the Hokage. Unrolling the scroll revealed 3 holding seals. With a quick pulse of chakra into the scroll, the seals released with a poof of smoke. Placing the now empty scroll aside, Hiruzen looked over the items that now lay on his desk. On his left was a stack of at least 10 scrolls, each one bore the seal of the Raikage. "I'm impressed, Danzo, your route were able to infiltrate Kumo far enough to access the Raikage's personal library." Not even bothering to look up at his old rival to see his reaction, the Sandaime continued looking over the items on his desk. In the center of his desk was 6-foot-long staff with a golden ring with 6 bangles dangling from it, so this is the very staff that the Sage of the Six Paths carried with him throughout his life. Picking up the staff, Sarutobi looked it over with a critical eye. "I must say it doesn't look like it has any kind of special gift like his 5 treasures." "I agree, Hokage-sama. However, we must remember that Kumo has an unusually high admiration for the sage and covet anything that has even the slightest link to him." The Sandaime nodded absently at his advisor's words, still inspecting the staff. "True, my old friend, they admire him so much they would probably hang a tissue he used in a shrine for worship." The 2 veteran shinobi chuckled slightly at that, knowing full well that it was completely true. Placing the monk's staff back onto his desk, Sarutobi looked over at the last item on his desk, one of the 5 targets the team had been sent to steal, the banana palm fan. It was unlike any other fan the Hokage had seen in his lifetime. The handle was wrapped in white tape with a silver ring on the tip. Attached to the ring were several snow-white feathers tipped with red at both ends. Before the Hokage could pick up the revered weapon, Danzo's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't pick that up if I were you, Hokage-sama." The Hokage gave his old friend a confused look. Apparently each of the treasures consumes massive amounts of chakra just by simply picking one up. "The team I sent into Kumo was comprised of 4 of my top infiltration specialists, only 3 returned. The one who didn't was the one who picked up the fan." Sarutobi jerked his hand away from the fan handle, his eyes wide with surprise. "So for one to wield the fan they must have exceptionally large chakra reserves. That complicates things a bit, but we can work our way around it later. For now, store the scrolls in my personal library and place these 2 in the high-security vault at the Anbu Armory," said Sarutobi as he resealed everything back into the scroll before handing it to Danzo, who left with a quick, "Hi, Hokage-sama." Alone once again, Sarutobi turned around in his chair to once again look out over his village. "Though I would have preferred to have more of the treasures, having one is still a boost to the village's power. Now I believe it is time to begin that other operation, thought the Hokage before summoning one of his Anbu back into the room. Prepare a tracking squad. I have a message that needs to be delivered and the recipient is very elusive. At once Hokage-sama, said the Anbu before he shunshined away to complete his task. The Sandaime chuckled slightly as he thought about the possible response from this message would bring before signaling another Anbu to appear. Summon the Sannin. I have a mission for them. Sunagakur no Sato. You have got to be kidding me, thought Naruto as he stood outside of a dimly lit bar. From the appearance of the place it looked like it was barely surviving off of the handful of customers he could see inside. Why the hell would Jiraiya-sensei be in a place like this? Though he said he was meeting a spy, not getting drunk. I agree, Kit, but you know what they say, the safest place to hide is in plain sight. Besides, who's going to suspect anyone who goes to this kind of place of being a spy? Sighing inwardly, Naruto nodded slightly as he walked into the dingy bar. Yeah, I guess you're right, Kurama, but still I expected something a little better than this. Before his tenant could respond, Naruto was stopped by two obviously drunk men standing in front of him. Hey kid, what the hell are you doing here? Looking for my grandfather. I think he wandered in here, said Naruto, keeping up his image as a normal 9-year-old civilian. The two men sneered at him through half-lidded eyes before the second one spoke up. Well, he's not here, so get out, you pathetic shrimp, before we make you. By now everyone in the bar was watching them, and none of them seemed to be moving anytime soon. Useless drunks, thought Naruto as he looked around at everyone's faces. Ignoring the two men in front of him, Naruto pushed past them and continued to walk into the bar. The two men just stared at his back in shock for a minute before it was quickly replaced by anger. Why, you snot-nosed little brat! Shouted the second drunk before he swung a fist at the back of Naruto's head. Before Naruto had a chance to counter, the man's fist was caught by a much larger hand. Naruto turned around to face the newcomer and smiled at who he saw. A middle-aged man with slightly graying hair with the build of an average civilian man held the man's wrist in a vice grip while glaring daggers at the would-be attacker. Lay a hand on my grandson and it will be the last thing you ever do, said the transformed Jiraiya as he tightened his grip on the man's wrist. Said man winced at the pressure being applied to his wrist, but his alcohol-induced anger was preventing him from seeing the obvious danger he was in. Stay out of this, you bastard! He screamed as he swung his other hand at Jiraiya. Easily catching the punch in his other hand, the Toad Sage pulled both arms down while raising his knee to meet them. A sickening crunch resounded throughout the bar as both of the man's arms were broken clean in two. You were warned, said Jiraiya before turning his attention to the other man who had been threatening Naruto. Do you want to try something like your friend here? The man quickly shook his head before fleeing the bar. Come on, Gaki, I've taken care of my business here, said Jiraiya as he motioned for Naruto to follow him out of the bar. The two shinobi continued down the road for a few minutes before Jiraiya led them into a nearby hotel. After renting a room for the night, Jiraiya sealed the room with a couple of seals and turned to his godson. So Gaki, did you find any information on the Ikibi Jinchuriki? More than information, I found him, said Naruto after he cancelled his transformation. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow in mild surprise, but his eyes narrowed slightly when he noticed Naruto's slightly sheepish look. Naruto scratched the back of his head as he answered his sensei's silent question. Well, you know how you told me not to approach him if I found him. At Jiraiya's nod he continued, well, I kind of talked to him. Jiraiya just stared at him for a little longer before sighing slightly. Oh well, I guess I should have seen this coming. Anyway, what did you two talk about? Naruto spent the next few minutes recapping his and Gaara's conversation in detail to Jiraiya, who would nod occasionally. When he had finished his explanation, Naruto watched as his sensei silently thought over what he had said. All right, Jiraiya said after a few minutes of silence, we'll meet up with him tonight and make our escape. Once we're clear of the village's range, we'll head back to the hideout. Once we're home, we'll plan out our next move and go from there. For now, though, we need to rest. We don't want to risk having to fight someone when we're tired. Naruto nodded in understanding and sat back on his bed and was soon asleep, shortly followed by Jiraiya. Later that night, "You ready, Gaki?" asked a shadowed figure with long spiky hair to the shorter figure next to him. Said figure closed his eyes in focus before they shot open, revealing his first-level Rinnegan. "Yeah, it's time we freed my brother from this hell of a village," said a young voice before the figure took off, jumping across the roofs of buildings towards the highest point in the village. The taller figure was quick to follow, easily catching up to his smaller companion. "We'll get him out of this village, Gaki. Don't worry," he said as the two of them continued across the roofs of the village. With Gaara same time, Gaara stood atop the roof of the tallest building in Sunagakur, waiting for his brother Jinchuriki to arrive. "I wonder what it will be like to travel the world," thought Gaara, his excitement showing even in his thoughts. All he had ever known in his short life was the harsh treatment and cold stares of the people of Suna. "You'll soon find out, Gaki. Ooh, I can't wait till you get older and start killing everyone that comes our way. Oh, it will be a glorious bloodbath." Gaara merely raised an eyebrow at his tenant's words. In the hours that followed his talk with Naruto, Shukaku had kept his word and restrained his power from continuously flowing into Gaara's chakra network. With his Biju's chakra no longer interfering with his own, Gaara had felt truly peaceful for the first time in his short. "As fighting and killing all you ever think about, you crazy pile of sand," thought Gaara with a small smirk. "Watch yourself, cub, or I'll come out there and show you what sand can really do," threatened Shukaku half-heartedly. Though he would never admit it to anyone, he enjoyed a good verbal fight every once in a while, and he was excited his Jinchuriki might actually be able to give him one. Yeah, just keep talking," thought Gaara before a wall of sand rose up behind him, stopping a hail of kunai from reaching him. "What the?" Gaara's voice trailed off as a person jumped out from the shadows. The red-haired Jinchuriki looked his attacker over, noticing they were wearing a white cloth over their face with a small gap for them to see through. They were also wearing the standard attire for a Suna Junin, a dark brown long-sleeved shirt with matching pants and sandals, a tan flak jacket with shoulder guards and 6 pockets lining the bottom of the jacket. They also wore a white turban like many other Suna shinobi, as well as dark brown fingerless gloves with metal plating. Their Suna headband was wrapped around their forehead, the metal gleaming in moonlight. Before Gaara could do anything, his attacker pulled out 2 more kunai and lunged at Gaara, fully intent on ending his young life. Like every other time someone had tried to assassinate him, the sand around Gaara reacted and blocked the attack before 2 spears formed and tried to impale the attacker. Said person jumped away from the spears, just barely avoiding being impaled. Looking at the young red head in front of him, the disguised Yoshimaru couldn't help but smile slightly at the sand protecting the child. "Karura, even in death you continue to protect your son. I'm sorry, but I must complete my mission. I only hope that when I see you in the afterlife, you can forgive me for this sin, because I will never forgive myself." Pulling another handful of kunai from his hip pouch, Yoshimaru tossed them into the air while channeling his chakra to his hands. The kunai he threw quickly righted themselves in midair, with the rest of the kunai on the roof raising into the air and surrounding Gaara. "Forgive me," Yoshimaru whispered before swinging his hands forward, launching all of the kunai at Gaara. Before the blades could reach him, and even before Gaara's sand could react, an invisible force knocked all of the blades away. "Shinra Tensai," a voice whispered from behind the two. Gaara looked over towards the voice and came face to face with his brother Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki. "Attacking my brother was a big mistake," said Naruto before Yoshimaru was forced to dodge as a fist passed over his head. He wasn't, however, able to dodge the kick that connected with his chest, sending him flying into the railing. Coughing up some blood that stained the cloth over his face, Yoshimaru looked up only to be met with the face of Jiraiya of the Sannin. "Jiraiya of the Sannin, he is that boy's sensei." thought Yoshimaru in shock before he noticed something even more surprising. Gaara's sand wasn't reacting to the two of them. In fact, it's starting moving around the two of them as it did Gaara, granting them its protection. Karura, you already trust these two enough to grant them your protection, thought Yoshimaru in surprise as he slowly made it to his feet. If you are willing to trust them, then I suppose I will as well. With that thought, he reached up and pulled the cloth away from his face, shocking Gaara in the process. Yoshimaru, but why? Asked Gaara, his shock clear for all to see. He couldn't believe that the one person in the village that cared for him, his own uncle, had tried to kill him. I'm sorry, Gaara. I was ordered to kill you by the Cage because you didn't show any signs of being able to control the Shukaku's power. But right now that's not important. What is important is getting you to safety, Gaara, said Yoshimaru, completely letting his guard down. Naruto still looked at Yoshimaru in suspicion, not willing to trust the man that had just tried to kill his fellow Jinchuriki so easily. Jiraiya, though, who knew of Yoshimaru's relation to the boy thanks to his informant, easily trusted the man's word, having been in a similar situation once before. Gaara, you must leave with these two, otherwise your father will send more people to kill you. He's right, said Jiraiya, if we want to get away without any interference, our window is small and closing quickly. Yoshimaru, if you were ordered to kill Gaara, it's also safe to assume that he will be checking in at some point if you don't report back. Yoshimaru nodded in agreement with Jiraiya's analysis. You're right, if you don't leave now, you may not have a chance of escaping without a war. Though Naruto was still unwilling to completely trust the man, he was right, if they didn't escape now they might not be able to at all. Noticing his sensei turning to him about say something, he beat him to it by going through a very familiar set of 5 hand seals. Slamming his right hand on the roof of the building, Naruto called out, summoning jutsu. In a poof of smoke, 3 birds exactly like the ones he and Jiraiya had ridden into the village appeared. Jiraiya couldn't help but smirk at his student's ability to read his thoughts before he even had to voice them. All right, you two, it's time we got out of here, said Jiraiya as he jumped onto the bird nearest him. Gaara walked up to his uncle and couldn't stop the few tears that spilled from his seafoam green eyes. I'll miss you, Yoshimaru, he said, his voice almost cracking. Yoshimaru smiled and bent down to be at the same level as his nephew. I know, Gaara, and I'll miss you too, but you have to be strong. I know you will become a powerful shinobi one day, and when that day comes, I want you to promise me you'll come back and restore this village's honor, okay? With tears running down his face, Gaara wrapped his uncle in a hug and nodded into his shoulder. I promise, when I'm strong enough I'll come back and bring honor back to Suna. Yoshimaru smiled as he hugged his nephew for what he knew would be the last time. Breaking the hug, Gaara gave his uncle one more small smile before jumping onto the last remaining bird. With a mental command, the 3 birds quickly shot into the sky and vanished into the darkness of the night, never to be seen again for years. Yoshimaru watched as the 3 birds flew away from the village with a small smile while a few tears fell from his blue eyes. I'm sorry, Gaara, I wish I could have seen the powerful shinobi you would have become, but I must make sure you're safe. Well, sis, I guess I'll be seeing you soon, thought Yoshimaru before he wrote a quick note that looked like it was written in the middle of a fight. His task done, he took one last look at where the 3 rogue shinobi had disappeared before he detonated the multitude of paper bombs on his chest. The explosion rocked a small portion of the village and quickly drew the attention of every shinobi and kunoichi in the vicinity as well as the Cage. The sight that greeted them was one that would forever be ingrained into their mind. The body that was once Yoshimaru, the feared and respected head of the Anbuan Medical Corps, was now no more than burnt remains with pieces of charged skin peeling away and revealing the reddened muscle underneath. Cage-sama, shouted one of the Junin that had arrived at the scene, holding a slightly burnt piece of paper. Taking the paper from his subordinate, the auburn-haired Cage looked the paper over and found 2 simple words that confirmed what he had hoped would happen. Two simple words that told him his right-hand man's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Mission accomplished. Land of Woods. The three shinobi had just dismounted Naruto's avian summons and were making their through the forests of the Land of Woods. They had decided to land a fair distance away from their new home so that if anyone had seen them flying in or had somehow tried to tail them, they wouldn't know exactly where their base of operations was. They were about 50 yards out away from what Naruto had dubbed the main tree and entrance to their base, when Jiraiya decided it was time to get things started. Alright you two, before we can do anything else, we need to check Gaara's seal and make what adjustments are necessary. But first, Gaara, I need you to tell me about anything that even remotely seems related to Shukaku being inside of you, said the Toad Sage, all traces of his easygoing nature gone, replaced by that of someone who had lived through things most couldn't even imagine. Gaara took a moment to answer, a thoughtful expression on his face. Well, the only things that I can think of would be the sand that protects me whenever I'm in danger and the fact that I can't sleep. Wrong, said the demonic voice of Shukaku from inside Gaara's head. Wait, what? Trailed off Gaara as his eyes glazed over and he stopped mid-step. Jiraiya looked at the still red head and was about to say something before his student cut him off. Don't bother Jiraiya-sensei, he's talking to Shukaku in his mindscape right now. There's only one way to reach a Jinchuriki when they're in their mindscape, and that's for another Jinchuriki to bring them to a place where only Jinchuriki and Biju can enter. For now we just have to wait for him to finish and hope no one shows up to fight. Whenever one of us is like this, we're completely defenseless. Jiraiya could only nod in understanding. Despite being one of the most informed and knowledgeable people in the elemental nations, his knowledge on Jinchuriki was rather limited. I guess we better get comfortable then, said Jiraiya as he sat down on a nearby root. Naruto nodded in agreement and moved to lean against a tree a couple of feet away from his brother Jinchuriki. Gaara's mindscape. The red-haired Jinchuriki slowly opened his eyes and to his surprise, he was no longer standing in the middle of a dense forest. Instead he found himself in the middle of a desert that seemed to have no end, even by desert standards. But what caught his attention was the sandstorm that was raging not 3 feet from him, the sandstorm that looked more like a sand twister with a dark shadow hidden in the center. His suspicions about what the twister was confirmed when he saw the dark shadow move around and slightly crazed voice spoke from behind it. Welcome to your mind, pup. I bet you're probably wondering why I have brought you in here, right? Gaara's only response was to nod a yes. He was too busy trying to get over his surprise at his current situation. Well, it has to do with what that white-haired toad summoner asked you. You see, the answer you gave him concerning your sand defense is only partially true. While my presence and powers amplify your defense, it is not the sole reason why you have it. I'm not too certain what the source of your defense is myself, but if I had to make an educated guess, it has something to do with your mother. Gaara, who had managed to get over his shock, was thrown back into it faster than any Fuden jutsu could. For as long as he could remember, he had been told by his uncle that his mother had loved him, even if she could never be there to prove it. Now that Shukaku had brought up the idea, he remembered once when he was 5 that Yoshimaru had told him that he believed that the sand that came to his aid was the will of his mother protecting him. I see you remember now. Your uncle didn't realize how close to the truth he was when he said the sand was controlled by your mother's will. Gaara, who had been too surprised to respond, finally seemed to find his voice. But how do you know you're right about this? He asked, his voice betraying his hidden fear. Fear at what Shukaku said being wrong, fear at losing possibly the only link he had to his mother. Shukaku looked at his Jinchuriki, and for the first time in over a millennia, sympathy showed through in his eyes. He may have been the most battle-crazed of the Biju, but he also knew what it was like never knowing the love of a mother. He and his siblings may know how they came to be and what, for lack of a better word, their mother was, but that still didn't help fill the void a mother's absence creates. I know I'm right because I was awake when I was first sealed into you, while you were still inside your mother's womb, said Shukaku as his eyes shined from behind the sand veil, showing Gaara his memory of the time. Flashback. Screw this accursed tea kettle. I swear one of these days I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to kill the son of a bitch who did this. These were the thoughts of the currently imprisoned Ikibi no Tanuki, after yet another failed attempt at escaping from his current prison. For years he had been trapped in the tea kettle, ever since his last Jinchuriki had lost control and he had gone on a rampage. He knew from past experience, and from what happened to his siblings, that he would be sealed into Anther Host in hopes of them being able to control his powers. Like anyone could truly control my powers, the only way a human would even have a chance at controlling my power was if they were born of the sand's truest love. I still don't know what the hell you meant by that, father, but oh well. A few days passed and things went as they normally would for the Biju. Try and break out, fail to break out and curse his prison. It was now January 19th, though Shukaku didn't know that, and unknown to the Biju his current prison was being taken away to perform a new sealing. Okay, one more try, thought Shukaku before something happened that he was all too familiar with. A glowing green seal appeared above him where the tea kettle's lid was located, and began to spin around causing an unnatural wind to pick up around him. No, I won't be sealed inside another human, thought the Tanuki, but it was too late. The seal abruptly stopped spinning and opened slightly, drawing him to it. He lost his physical form and was forced into his pure chakra state as the seal continued to absorb his power. Outside the seal same time. Is everything ready, Chiyo-sama? Asked the Yondaime Cage as he stood next to one of his elders in an operating room. Doctors ran around the room, making sure the equipment was working and occasionally writing things down on their clipboards. In the middle of the large room, lying on the lone operating table was a woman with shoulder-length sandy brown hair. Her naturally kind face was flushed red as she breathed deeply, a noticeable bulge in stomach, a sure sign she was pregnant. She was Karura, wife to the Cage and mother to a 3-year-old Tamari and a 2-year-old Konkuro. Chiyo, an elderly woman in her late 50s with gray hair tied into a tight bun, nodded a yes to the village leader's questions. Yes, everything is ready. The Shukaku's power has already been absorbed into the seal and is ready for transfer. Good. Then begin the sealing, said the Cage as he moved to the foot of his wife's operating table. Chiyo nodded once again, signaling for the doctors to stand back so they wouldn't get in the way. The doctors were quick to comply, none of them willing to risk angering one of the honored siblings. Once everyone was out of her way, she pulled a brush from her sleeve and dipped it into a bowl filled with blood. Prepare yourself, Karura. Once the seal is drawn, I will push the Shukaku's chakra through you and into your child, said Chiyo, her voice not betraying any of her emotions. Karura took one last deep breath before nodding in understanding, mentally slowing her chakra so it wouldn't interfere with the sealing. Chiyo didn't waste any time in drawing the seal over the pregnant Kunoichi's abdomen, a simple circle with 2 smaller circles on either side of the circle's edge. Inside the small circle on the right was the kanji for stay, while the kanji for sit was drawn in the circle on the left. In the center of the main circle, the kanji for wind was drawn with 4 small dots surrounding it. With the seal complete, Chiyo put away her brush and began going through a long chain of hand seals, ending with the dog seal. Fuinjutsu. Wind hound sealing jutsu. The second the words left her lips, the seal on Karura's abdomen began glowing a similar shade of green to the seal that absorbed Shukaku. At the same time, the same seal that absorbed Shukaku appeared on the tea kettle and released a stream of sandy brown chakra that was immediately drawn into the new seal that would hold it. A few minutes passed before the stream of chakra finally ended and the rest of it was absorbed into the seal. Once the last of the chakra was sealed, the seal started to spiral in on itself before vanishing entirely. Chiyo let out a deep sigh at the concentration and effort the sealing had required. It's done. The child in Karura's womb is now the newest Jinchuriki of the Shukaku. The Yondaime nodded absent-mindedly, His attention was drawn as one of the machines that were monitoring the pregnancy started acting up. Report. What is happening? Demanded the cage as the doctors rushed around checking every machine's readings and making what adjustments were needed. Cage-sama, the sealing must have affected the pregnancy. Karura-sama is going into labor right now, shouted one of the doctors that was checking Karura over. Sir, if we don't act quickly, it is likely we may lose both Karura-sama and her child. Then what are you waiting for? Get to work, shouted the Yondaime cage as he stepped back and let the medics do their job. Inside the seal. I always hated when they do that, thought Shukaku as his chakra condensed back into his corporeal form. Taking in his new surroundings, he was surprised to find nothing but a dark expanse. What the hell is this? Thought Shukaku as he sent a small portion of his chakra to probe the mind of his new host. What he found surprised him. He was sealed into the body of a baby that wasn't even born yet. But what he could tell from the memories of the women carrying the child, was that his own father had ordered the sealing, some old hag had performed it, and they used the same exact seal that was used on his previous Jinchuriki. Seriously, these humans need to learn something new if they're using the same seal they used on my last Jinchuriki. Oh well, I drove that one insane, I can drive this one insane. Unfortunately for him, his thoughts were cut short as a never-ending desert appeared around him and a sand twister formed around him. What the? Thought the giant tanuki before a symbol flashed in front of him for a brief moment. It can't be, thought Shukaku in surprise, it had only happened for a brief moment, but it would forever be ingrained into his memory. The symbol that appeared before him was a kanji, the kanji for love. Outside the seal a few minutes ago. It's small, premature from the looks of it. Will it truly be able to handle it? Asked the cage as he looked at the red-haired baby that was just barely larger than the hands holding him. Chio nodded slightly as she looked at the child with a passive stare. He is compatible. She took a quick glance around the room at the doctors working endlessly at their stations. This is the third child, and the first compatible one. We must raise this child with great care. Before the cage had a chance to respond, a raspy, strained voice made itself known, show me my baby's face. The Yondaime spun around to face his wife, a look of worry clearly visible on his normally impassive face. Karura, are you alright? He shouted as the doctor holding his newborn son moved to set the baby down so his mother could see him. The exhausted Kunoichi slowly turned her head to look at the small form that was placed next to her head. What a small, feeble child. She managed to say in between her ragged breaths. The cage's attention was drawn from the mother-son scene as one of the doctors whispered to him. Karura-sama's heart rate is rapidly falling. Before he had a chance to finish though, he was cut off by an obviously angered cage. Do something about it, quickly. He was about to start barking orders to the rest of the doctors and medics before the voice of his wife once again cut him off. No matter what happens, I'll always protect you. Gaara. The Yondaime cage could only look on as his wife brought her hands up to surround her son in a protective manner as she slowly took her last breaths. The cage looked on as his beloved wife died with her arms still wrapped around Gaara protectively. Over the continuous sound of the heart monitor and the shouts of doctors and medics trying to resuscitate the deceased mother, the cage heard his wife's last words echo in his mind once more. No matter what happens, I'll always protect you, Gaara. Flashback end. Gaara stood rooted in place, tears rolling down his face as he took in what he had just learned. My mother truly loved me. I was loved at one time. Shukaku nodded his head from behind his prison. Yes, and not just then, even now your mother's love protects you from within the sand. For the first time in his life, Gaara let a true smile grace his face as he shed tears of joy. He had been loved, his mother truly loved him, and even in death she continued to protect and love him. Shukaku watched as his Jinchuriki let loose all of the pent-up emotion he had been forced to endure in his short life. Unbeknownst to his Jinchuriki though, the kanji for love, slowly appeared just above where his left eyebrow was supposed to be. It seems that the one born of the sand's truest love has finally found himself. It seems you were right once again, father. Maybe, just maybe, this pup will be the one to unlock the true extent of my power. I do not know what the future holds for us now, but I do know that no matter what, I will always stand by you, Gaara. Jiraiya and Naruto were still waiting for Gaara to come out of his mindscape so they could continue on to the hideout. Hey Gaki, how long does something like this usually take? Asked a slightly annoyed Jiraiya as he readjusted himself for what felt like the 100th time. Kami, if every secret about Jinchuriki is like this, then I'm not sure I want to find out about the rest of them. Naruto shrugged his shoulders from his place against a tree. It depends. Usually a conversation with one's biju is instantaneous in the real world, even if they spent the equivalent of hours talking. However, there are certain cases where the time spent in one's mindscape is the same amount of time that passes in the real world. That usually happens when the biju shows the host something like a memory, which is probably what Shukaku is doing for Gaara. Jiraiya nodded in understanding and was about to ask another question, but something caught his eye. Looking over towards the newest Jinchuriki of their little group, he was surprised to see a red kanji slowly appearing above Gaara's left eye. What the hell? He asked aloud, bringing Naruto's attention towards his fellow Jinchuriki as well. That's new. It must have something to do with what they were talking about. No sooner had Naruto finished than did Gaara's eyes lose their glazed look. Man, that's going to take some getting used, said Gaara as he wobbled slightly from the sensation of returning to one's body. Once he managed to right himself, he looked at his two traveling companions and saw them looking at him strangely, specifically the left side of his forehead. What? Naruto was the first to respond. Where'd the tattoo come from, Gaara? What tattoo? Asked Gaara as he rubbed his forehead. You won't be able to feel it, you knucklehead. It's a part of your skin, said the voice of Shukaku from inside his head. The tattoo is the kanji symbol for love. If I had to hazard a guess, it is most likely the physical manifestation of your mother's love for you. Hey Gaara, you okay? Asked Naruto, shaking his brother Jinchuriki slightly. Yeah, said Gaara as he shook his head slightly. Shukaku just told me that the tattoo on my forehead is probably the physical manifestation of my deceased mother's love for me. Jiraiya sat in contemplation for a moment at this new revelation. It's entirely possible. With everything I've seen in this world, it wouldn't surprise me. Naruto and Gaara nodded in understanding while the Toad Sage stood up and dusted himself off. Well then, if you two are ready, let's back to the hideout and get Gaara's seal fixed up. With that, the three rogue shinobi continued on towards their new home in moderate silence. Kanahagakure Hokage Tower. You summoned us, Hokage-sama? Asked a voice as the door to the Hokage's office was opened. The Hokage looked from some papers he was going over and couldn't help the smirk that crossed his lips. Before him stood three of the most powerful ninja Konoha had at its disposal. The first one to enter was a young man in his early 20s that had a very unique hairstyle. His silver hair seemed to defy gravity itself as it stood up on his head while leaning to his left side slightly. He wore the standard issue shinobi garb for all active Konoha shinobi. A navy blue, long-sleeved shirt with red swirl symbols on the shoulders, and matching navy blue pants and shinobi sandals with white tape wrapped around his ankles. He also wore a dark green flak jacket that had 3 scroll pouches on both sides of the chest. The flak jacket also had a raised neck guard with extra padding over the shoulders, and a red swirl pattern on the back. His face and neck were hidden by a face mask that covered everything from his nose down. His headband was slanted down over his left eye, and rounding off his outfit were navy blue, fingerless gloves with metal plating on the back. The second one to enter didn't seem to have any sense of fashion, if his outfit was anything to go by. A green jumpsuit covered a well-built frame with orange striped leg warmers and an unzipped standard Konoha Junin flak jacket. His headband's normal blue cloth was replaced by a red one and wrapped around his waist like a belt. His hairstyle didn't help him much in the looks department either. Black hair cut into a bowl style with thick, bushy eyebrows made him look like an even weirder individual. The last of three was by far the most normal looking out of all of them. The man wore the standard navy uniform of a Konoha ninja with the sleeves rolled up halfway, a Junin flak jacket, regular shinobi sandals and a normal headband. Around his waist was a sash with the kanji for fire on it, signifying he was once a member of the 12 guardian ninja that protected the fire daimyo. He also had white tape wrapped around his upper arms with a pair of bangles on his wrists. They were Kakashi Hatake, aka Kakashi or the Sharingan, Might Guy, Konoha's sublime green beast, and Asuma Sarutobi, son of the Sandaime Hokage. They were three of the most powerful shinobi currently in Konoha's ranks. They were also the newest generation of Sannin. Yes, Kakashi, I did, said the Sandaime as he leaned forward on his elbows. I have a mission for the three of you. Asuma raised an eyebrow in mild surprise. A mission that requires all three of us? What the hell do you want us to do, Pops? Sarutobi shook his head slightly at his son's refusal to refer to him with his title, but it was a slightly refreshing change from the norm. Well, to put it simply, I need the three of you to bring someone back to the village. He is a former shinobi of Konoha that went rogue when I foolishly tried to have my former students kill him. Only now do I realize what a mistake it was trying to kill him. The experiments he was conducting may have been considered inhumane by some, but they could lead to some of the greatest breakthroughs the shinobi world has ever seen. I believe you three are familiar with his page in the bingo book, Hirako, the wielder of the Chimera Jutsu. Kakashi's lone eye widened slightly at this piece of information. Hirako, if he is the target Hokage-sama, then convincing him to return to the village will be very difficult and will most likely end in bloodshed. The Hokage nodded in agreement with Kakashi's assessment. That may be true, but certain circumstances have been met and it should be easier to convince Hirako to return to us. For one, all of my former students have fled the village. With this we can promise him a chance at revenge for what they tried to do to him. Second, is that I have written a high-priority letter that has been sealed with a sample of Hirako's chakra and blood. The letter is an apology for past actions, and a promise that if he will return, any experiment he wishes to conduct will have the backing of the Hokage and elders. Guy, who had been strangely quiet since he entered the office, finally decided to speak up. Any experiment, Hokage-sama. Doesn't that seem a little risky? What if he decides to experiment on Konoha shinobi? Kakashi and Asuma both nodded in agreement. Part of the reason Hirako was targeted for assassination was because it was feared that he would use his kinjutsu on fellow Konoha shinobi. Once again the Hokage nodded in understanding. It may seem a little risky, but that is why we will be supplying Hirako with his test subjects. Any captured foreign ninja that have already been tortured for everything they know will be the main source of the test subjects. We will also offer him free reign of Konoha's maximum security prison to select any promising subjects as well. Also, as I have written in the letter, all of his experiments will have to be approved beforehand, by myself and the elders, but other than that, he will have free reign to conduct his experiments. This seemed to placate the worries of the new Sannin as Kakashi stepped forward to take the letter the Hokage had written for Hirako. We'll leave immediately, Hokage-sama, said Kakashi after he pocketed the scroll. Asuma and Guy nodded in agreement, and the three of them left the office shortly after that to begin their mission. The Sandaime sat there for a moment before turning towards one of the darkened corners of his office. You can come out now, Danzo. Your skills are as sharp as ever, Hiruzen, said Danzo as he stepped out of the shadows. The Hokage chuckled slightly before leaning back in his chair to relax. Our shinobi forces aren't the only ones who have been training. Indeed, but that is not why I am here, said Danzo as he took a seat across from his rival. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow in curiosity, silently asking Danzo to continue. While I do not question your choice to have the Sannin retrieve Hirako, I am curious why you chose Hirako over, say, Orochimaru. An understandable curiosity, my friend, but the reason I chose to have Hirako retrieved instead of Orochimaru is simple. Orochimaru felt betrayed by me directly. Even if I were to extend this same offer to him and he actually accepted it, there would always be a lack of trust for my past actions. Hirako, on the other hand, while he does know I was the one to order his execution, his closest friends, my former students, were the ones who committed the actual act. His anger lies with them for betraying him in such a way. Also, he was always jealous of them for their skill and power because he wasn't born with anything that could help him become as strong as them. His jealousy and anger towards them will be his motivation to return to the village, and the offer of us backing his experiments is just the icing on the cake to sweeten the deal. Danzo nodded in understanding and couldn't help but smirk at his rival's newly discovered manipulative side. Sarutobi returned the smirk and the two of them continued to plan for the inevitable future that was to come. Their conversation was interrupted a few hours later by a knock on the door. "Enter," commanded the Hokage as the door opened to reveal his secretary. "Forgive me, Hokage-sama, I wasn't aware you were having a meeting with Danzo-sama," said the secretary as she bowed to the two shinobi. "It's all right, what was it that you needed, Yuki-san?" said the Hokage, waving off her apology. "The tracking squad you requested has arrived, Hokage-sama. They await your orders," said the secretary as she looked at her clipboard. "Very well, send them in," ordered the Hokage. Yuki bowed once more before leaving, while Danzo moved to stand behind his leader. As soon as Yuki left, the door opened once more, admitting 4 new arrivals. The first one was a tall, well-built man with a slightly tanned complexion. He wore the standard outfit of a Konoha Junin, consisting of a dark green flak jacket and a black suite underneath with the sleeves ripped off. In addition to the standard Junin uniform, he also wore a white wolf's pelt like a coat that showed off the scars on his arms. His wild, silverish-gray hair was pulled into a ponytail at the base of his skull that reached a little past his shoulders. His pupils resembled those of a wolf more than they did a human. His elongated canines jutted out from his upper lip slightly, and on his cheeks were the distinctive red fangs of the Inuzuka clan. On his left was his canine partner, a pure white dog that reached his waist in height and at first glance could be easily mistaken for a wolf. The dog's red, slitted eyes shone with the superiority and strength of an alpha. They were Ukami Inuzuka and his partner Shiromaru, the head of the Inuzuka clan. The next one to enter was Sume Inuzuka and her own partner, Kuromaru. Sume had a very animalistic look about her, much like her husband. She had long, spiky, untamed brown hair, vertical slit-like pupils, elongated canines, and the Inuzuka clan's red fang-like marks on her cheeks. Her lips were colored a dark shade of purple and she had red eye shadow that matched the color of her fang marks. She wore the standard outfit for a Konoha Junin much like her husband's, but a slight difference was that she had her sleeves rolled up slightly and bandages wrapped around her legs. Kuromaru, as his name suggests, has black fur with a white underside. Like Shiromaru, he was also wolfish in appearance, but not to the extent of Shiromaru. The third member of the tracking squad was, by his appearance alone, a member of the Aburame clan. Shibi Aburame was the head of the Aburame clan and by far one of the most skilled trackers and tactical minds in Konoha's ranks. Like all members of his clan, his eyes were obscured by dark glasses which featured a single tassel hanging down from one side. He had spiky short black hair and small mustache which could just be seen over the top of his high-collared outfit. On his back was a gourd that acted like an extra hive for the numerous kikaichu his clan used in combat. Another little quirk about him, and most of his fellow clansmen, was that they tended to keep their hands in their pockets, only taking them out when commanding their kikaichu. The last member of the tracking squad was much younger than his current teammates. A young boy of 16 with short, unkempt, black hair and a relatively broad nose and well-defined eyelashes, which were turned upwards at each end, walked in with an impassive face. He wore the standard attire of the Uchiha clan, a black, high-collared shirt with the Uchiha fan on the back along with a pair of loose matching pants and shinobi sandals. A tanto was strapped to the right side of the back of his shoulder, held in place by a harness that ran across his chest and fastened over both his shoulders. This young man was Shisui Uchiha, one of the most powerful shinobi the Uchiha clan had ever produced. "You needed to see us, Hokage-sama?" asked Shisui, his voice void of emotion. "Yes, Shisui, I did," said the Hokage as he pulled a mission scroll out of his desk. "I am assigning the four of you to a long-term A-rank retrieval mission. You are to track down and return Tsunade Senju to the village, no matter what it takes. When you first find her, try to convince her to rejoin us willingly, but should that fail you are authorized to use whatever methods necessary to bring her back." "Hi Hokage-sama, we'll leave at once," said Ukami with a feral grin at the prospect of fighting such a powerful opponent. Sum shared his husband's thoughts, but was a little more worried about the outcome of that fight. Shibi didn't show any outward emotion, but inside he was worried slightly. No matter how you looked at this mission, and the potential fight ahead, they were up against one of the Sannin. Someone who has lived through 2 shinobi world wars, he had no delusions that even with the 4 of them fighting together could they even hope to defeat her. Shisui just raised an eyebrow in moderate surprise, but eventually shrugged it off. If it was a part of his mission, then he would comply without question and perform to the best of his ability. "Very well, Ukami, as the most experienced member of the team, you will be in charge. Once you have Tsunade, return to the village at once and bring her straight to me," ordered the Hokage while Danzo just looked on impassively. With a quick chorus of, "Hi, Hokage-sama," the 4 ninja, and 2 ninkin, vanished in a massive swirl of leaves. "Are you sure they can complete this mission, Hiruzen?" asked Danzo once they were alone. "Yes, if only just," said Sarutobi as leaned back in his chair and turned to look out at the village. Shibi should be able to drain most of Tsunade's chakra, allowing the other 3 to capture her with relative ease. If that should fail, however, Shisui has his hidden ace to help complete the mission. Danzo nodded in agreement. "So you know about his Mangekyo Sharingan as well, eh?" "Yes, it is not hard to notice the increase in his chakra to his eyes whenever he so much as activates it. Also, I had Inoichi go into the mind of one of the higher-ups in the Uchiha clan, and he found something very interesting. It appears that the Uchiha clan has been keeping quite a large secret from the rest of us. It seems that beneath the Naka shrine is a secret Uchiha meeting room, wherein lies a stone tablet containing all of the ancient secrets of the Uchiha." Danzo couldn't stop the look of complete shock that crossed his face at this piece of information. He may have a spy or 2 inside the clan that knew quite a few secrets the Uchiha clan would prefer to keep hidden. But even his best spy hadn't been able to get a hold of that kind of information. Hiruzen smirked when he saw a former rival's face from the reflection in the window. Yes, it was quite surprising when Inoichi relayed that piece of information. Unfortunately though, the Uchiha whose mind I had Inoichi enter hadn't had the chance to read what was written on the tablet. I feel that whatever is written on that tablet will be vital to the village in more ways than one. Danzo, who managed to get his emotions back under control, nodded in agreement. "I believe you are right, Hiruzen. No matter what, we must know what is written on that tablet. I will prepare a squad of my best root operatives to steal the tablet. Once we have it, we—" "It is not that simple, Danzo," interrupted Sarutobi as he turned in his chair to face his former rival. Danzo gave the Hokage a look that clearly showed his confusion. "It seems that the tablet is written some kind of code that only the Sharingan and now Mangekyo Sharingan can decipher. If we wish to know the secrets that are written on the tablet, we will need a Sharingan to read it for us." Both men were silent for a while after that, each going through plans that would hopefully lead to them finding out the secrets written on the tablet. Both men's heads snapped up to meet one another's gaze. "Hirako. If Hirako returns to the village, and we give him the eyes of a few Uchiha, started Danzo. And give him access to the notes we collected from Orochimaru's lab, continued Sarutobi. Then maybe he can successfully transplant them into a new host. They finished at the same time. The two of them shared a rather sadistic smirk before they began to plot different ways to achieve their goal, should their first plan fail. Land of Woods. Jiraiya's hideout. The next day, Naruto was sitting on the semicircle couch watching the monitors that displayed different locations in Konoha. After they reached the hideout, Jiraiya had been adamant about fixing Gaara's seal the minute he was ready. So about half an hour later, Jiraiya had taken Gaara into another of the many rooms in the hideout. 2 hours had passed since Jiraiya had begun to work on Gaara's seal, and in that time, Naruto had silently practiced with his gravity manipulation. Not only had he levitated himself with his gravitational abilities, he had also practiced by altering the gravitational field of objects around him. At first he started by levitating large items such as the couch, and slowly worked his way down to much smaller objects like the remote for the monitors. It seemed that altering the gravitational field around larger areas was much easier, as it required less concentration. But the smaller the object he tried to levitate, the more and more he had to focus on only altering the gravity around that specific object. If he couldn't, then the gravitational field would expand out of his control. Currently he was working on levitating multiple small objects at once, forcing himself to split his focus evenly while at the same time maintaining the same intensity to keep the gravity in his control. His attention was drawn from his training when he saw his sensei walk out from the room he knew housed his spy network sealing matrix. Sensei, what were you doing in the seal matrix room? I thought you were working on improving Gaara's seal. I was Gaki, started Jiraiya as he took a seat, but I finished about an hour ago. Gaara fell asleep almost as soon as the process was over, and when I came out to tell you, you were too focused on your training to notice me. So I decided to check on my spy network for any updates and send out a command to be on the lookout for any information concerning the other Jinchuriki. Naruto had the decency to look somewhat sheepish at not noticing his sensei, even though he probably wasn't even 10 feet away at the time. Hehe. Sorry about that, sensei. I just thought I would go ahead and train my gravity manipulation while you were working on Gaara's seal. It's alright, Gaki. But let this serve as a lesson. No matter where you are, no matter how tight the security around you may be, always be aware of your surroundings and always be ready for anything that might happen. It may sound like being paranoid, but doing that is one of the reasons I have lived as long as I have in this world of ours, said Jiraiya, for once sounding like the wizened sage he claimed to be. Naruto, though disappointed at his mistake, nodded in understanding, silently promising himself he wouldn't let it happen again. Anyway, I found out some very interesting and disturbing information from one of my spies in Omegakure. This caught Naruto's attention. What did you find out, Jiraiya-sensei? Jiraiya sighed slightly, but met his student's gaze nonetheless. Akatsuki, a criminal organization, which at the moment is comprised of 6 S-ranked rogue ninja, is on the move. Apparently they're looking for new members, but they're also taking on some missions as a mercenary group. My spy wasn't able to discern what their end goals are, but he did manage to figure out who their main targets are. Who are they targeting, sensei? Asked Naruto, not really sure if he wanted to know, and the feeling of dread in his stomach wasn't exactly helping. Jiraiya met Naruto's gaze once again, this time all traces of the Jiraiya who liked to goof off a little gone. In his place was Jiraiya of the Sannin, a warrior who had lived through hells that most people couldn't even imagine. It was really unnerving to Naruto to see the sudden transformation in his sensei's personality, but what he said next nearly made his heart fail. They're targeting the Jinchuriki. Naruto sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, slowly coming to grips that there was an organization like the Akatsuki targeting the Jinchuriki. Do we know when they might make a move on the Jinchuriki? Asked Naruto, his voice shaking in fear. Fear for himself and his fellow sibling Jinchuriki, and what might happen to them should Akatsuki succeed in their goals. Not for quite some time. Apparently whoever the leader of Akatsuki is wants there to be at least 10 primary members before they make any move on the Jinchuriki. At best, I would say we have a few years before they start to make themselves known to the world, Jiraiya said as he went through everything he learned from his spy in AIM again. Naruto seemed to brighten slightly at this. Good, if they don't plan on making any moves for a few years, then we have some time to gather more of the Jinchuriki and boost our own strength for when we face them. That said, as soon as Gaara wakes up we need to make plans to get Chomei's Jinchuriki out of Takigakure as soon as possible. No, said Jiraiya in a tone that left no room for argument. No, what do you mean no? We can't just leave them there, screamed Naruto as he stood up, his anger easily showing through. Sit down Naruto, commanded Jiraiya in a tone that remained Naruto of the way the Sandaime Hokage ordered his shinobi around. You and Gaara will not be participating in the extraction of the Nanabi Jinchuriki, I will be handling that one alone. I have a different mission for the two of you. But sensei, why can't we help? What could you possibly have us do that is more important than helping our sibling Jinchuriki? Gaining experience as shinobi, said Jiraiya, the Akatsuki is comprised of S-ranked rogue ninja, each an extremely skilled and experienced shinobi. You are very skilled for your age, and given some time to train, Gaara could easily catch up to you with the use of his sand. But you two lack the experience required to fight such an opponent, so you will be doing missions to gain that experience and to hone your skills while I am away. Before I leave, I will leave behind a blood clone that will supervise your missions and will only step in if the situation truly demands it. Naruto nodded in understanding, but he still didn't like not being able to help one of his siblings. What is our mission, Jiraiya-sensei? Your first mission will be to attack and raid one of minor poison research centers of Kusagakure. Once you complete this mission, the blood clone will tell you your other missions and you will keep this pattern going until I return. Now back to the mission, you and Gaara will attack the research center and bring back as much information, and if you can samples, of all of the poisons the lab has. Jiraiya paused for a minute to allow Naruto absorb what he had already told him. Consider this mission a form of training if you want. It will force you to think on your feet and make split-second decisions, skills that are crucial to a shinobi. Understood sensei, said Naruto, but what of the guards and scientists stationed there? Kill the guards, and interrogate the scientist for everything they know, said Jiraiya, causing Naruto's eyes to widen slightly before nodding in understanding. Good. Once Gaara awakens, my clone will explain everything to him and you can leave to start your mission, said the Toad Sage as he got up and moved towards his room. I'll be leaving in a few hours, but before that we're going to have a quick spar. Meet me outside in few minutes, and don't hold back, treat this spar as a real fight and aim to kill me. Yes sensei, said Naruto before moving towards his own room to prepare his gear. A few minutes later found the two shinobi standing across from one another in a clearing a few minutes away from the hideout. For several seconds neither of them made a move to attack. A small breeze blew through clearing, causing a single leaf to fall to the ground. The instant the leaf touched the ground both shinobi sprang into action, charging one another to engage in taijutsu. Naruto jumped and using his momentum spun around to deliver a roundhouse to Jiraiya's head. Jiraiya raised his arms in defense and grabbed onto the blonde's ankle before throwing him away. Readjusting himself mid-flight, Naruto landed on his feet and started going through hand seals, his Rinnegan blazing. Kaden. Phoenix Flower Jutsu, said Naruto before bringing his right hand to his lips and shooting out multiple small fireballs at his sensei. He didn't stop there however as he quickly went through a chain of seals. Futen. Great breakthrough, this time instead of fire, Naruto blew a strong wind towards his sensei. The wind from his great breakthrough quickly caught up to the small fireballs, increasing their speed and feeding their flames, causing them to grow in size. Jiraiya gaped at the combination for a second, before remembering that that incredible combination was barreling towards him. Doden. Earth wall, said Jiraiya after going through a quick series of hand signs. A wall of earth rose from the ground just in time to block the onslaught of wind-enhanced fireballs. Damn, I told him come at me with the intent to kill, and boy is he delivering. The Toad Sage's thoughts were interrupted as his defense was demolished by a quick blast of gravity. No more playing around, mumbled Jiraiya before speeding through a set of seals and ending with the snake seal. Doden. Earth Dragon Bomb, a large dragon head made of mud formed next to Jiraiya. It started firing multiple small mud balls at Naruto. I hope this works, thought Naruto as he went through another chain of seals. Raiden, lightning slash. His right hand erupted with lightning, swinging it towards the incoming projectiles. He launched a wave of lighting, effectively nullifying the Doden Jutsu. Not wanting to give his sensei another chance to attack, he held his left hand out towards him, Bansho Tenon. The effect was instantaneous. Jiraiya was pulled towards the waiting blonde who drew a kunai with his free hand. While in mid-flight, Jiraiya managed to form a few seals for one of his favorite defenses. Ninpu. Needle Jizo, said Jiraiya just as he was within striking distance. His hair elongated and surrounded his body before hardening into sharp needles. Naruto barely had a second to react as the massive ball of spikes flew towards him. Abandoning his first plan, he rolled out of the way of his sensei's airborne form, though he didn't get away without injury. A few of the hair needles managed to catch him in the side, drawing a little blood and shredding part of his shirt in the process. Jiraiya ended his jutsu and rolled once to right himself before turning to face his student, only to see a two-headed dog the size of a horse charging him. Oh, I am so making him pay for this, said Jiraiya as he jumped into one of the trees to avoid being eaten. Speeding through a short chain of hand seals, Jiraiya jumped behind the summons, Ninpu, Needle Hell. Once again his hair elongated, but this time instead of forming a defense, countless needles shot from the mane of white and impaled the dog in the back, dispelling it. Now Jiraiya was on alert. He had fought that dog of Naruto's once before and it had the ability to keep dividing itself the more it was attacked. The only way for that dog to dispel is if you hit all of the heads at once, or Naruto dispels it willingly, thought Jiraiya as he looked around for his student. What the hell is he planning? Unfortunately for Jiraiya, he got his answer as two hands burst out of the ground and grabbed onto his ankles. Doden. Headhunter Jutsu, said the voice of Naruto as Jiraiya was pulled underground. Naruto rose from the ground himself to inspect his work only to find Jiraiya's head not sticking out of the ground. What? How'd he get away? Doden. Hiding like a mole jutsu, said Jiraiya's voice before he jumped out of the ground in front of Naruto and delivered a right hook that sent the blonde flying into a tree on the other side of the clearing. Naruto rubbed his head as he sat up against the tree he was sent into. I thinks that enough for now, Gaki. You did well. You showed a very interesting number of very effective strategies. Your elemental manipulation has also improved, but you're still lacking in your Suiden, and your Doden and Raiden could use some more work as well. Your Kaden and Fuden are advanced and you've worked out ways to make up for that lack of power by combining them, but you still need to increase their individual strength overall. Got it, sensei, said Naruto, still nursing the lump on his head. If that's all, sensei, I'm gonna head back to the hideout and rest for a bit. With that said, he slowly got up and started walking towards the hideout. Jiraiya smirked at his student's retreating form before taking out a kunai and cutting his left palm. Kinjutsu. Blood clone, said Jiraiya after going through a short chain of seals. A small amount of blood fell from his wound and slowly began growing and taking form. Once the jutsu was complete, Jiraiya was looking at an exact duplicate of himself. You know what to do, keep an eye on them and train them a little bit before they begin the mission to Kusagaker. Got it, said the clone before jumping into the trees to return to the hideout. The original Jiraiya stayed in the clearing for a little longer, mentally deciding which of his two targets he should find first. Making his decision, Jiraiya sped away at top speed, heading towards the land of fire to begin his search for his first target. I can only hope she agrees to help us, thought Jiraiya as made his way through the trees. Hideout a few hours later. Gaara had just woken up and for the first time in his life, he felt truly refreshed and ready for anything. When he exited the room he was sleeping in, he found Naruto and Jiraiya sitting on the semicircle couch watching the monitors. Jiraiya was the first to notice his presence, and beckoned him to join them on the couch. So how was your nap, Gaara? Asked Jiraiya with a small smirk. Gaara couldn't keep the pleasant smile off of his face as he answered. Wonderful. I'm looking forward to the next time I can sleep. Naruto and Jiraiya chuckled a little at that comment. It wasn't every day you met someone who actually wanted to sleep as often as he could, unless of course you live in Konoha and know Nara. Well, that will have to wait for a while. You two have a few missions to do while the real me is away, said the blood clone. At Gaara's questioning gaze, the clone began to explain the situation to the Ikibi Jinchuriki with Naruto helping out every now and then. After the explanation, the clone began to tell them what they would be doing before they left for their mission. You two need to train as a team before we can begin the mission. Also, Gaara needs to practice with controlling his sand and not just letting it act on its own. The two 9-year-olds nodded together and the three left the hideout to train shortly after. For the rest of the day, and a good portion of the next day, Naruto and Gaara trained together, running through multiple scenarios and combat situations. They also worked on their individual skills, with Gaara managing to gain a good grasp of control his sand at his will, though it still retained its protective nature and would go against Gaara's will if it meant keeping him safe. Naruto, thanks to the help of a handful of shadow clones, had managed to increase his Fudan and Kaden manipulation to a point that he could control the wind around him to an extent without the use of a jutsu, and he could also create a small flame with his chakra alone. Currently the two young shinobi were in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by Jiraiya clones. They were working on fighting off multiple enemies at once while at the same time covering for each other. With a quick nod to each other, Gaara launched a wave of sand towards the clones while Naruto used the chance to launch a Kaden Fudan combination in the opposite direction, taking out a good number of clones. From up in a tree, Jiraiya's blood clone watched on in mild surprise as the two boys tore through the ranks of his clones with relative ease. Incredible, each of those clones was fighting with the skill of a seasoned chunin, and those two are just demolishing them as if it were nothing. They're stronger together than I gave them credit for. They haven't even been training together for 24 hours yet, and their skills as a team are already advanced enough that can tell what the other is thinking with just a glance. The blood clone's thoughts were halted as the last of his clones were defeated and the two boys were standing back to back, waiting for another attack. That's enough for now, you two. I think you're more than ready for this first mission, said the clone as he jumped down in front of the boys. The two smiled slightly at the praise. So when do we leave to begin the mission, sensei? Asked Naruto. Now, said the clone, surprising the two boys. Kusagaker is a few hours travel from here, but when we arrive, you two will be on your own. I will only step in if one of you is about to die, understand? The two nodded in understanding. They knew that once they began the mission it was all on them. Good. Naruto, summon a few birds and we'll be on our way. The blonde Jinchuriki quickly complied and summoned 3 birds for them to ride, and no sooner had they all got on a bird, then did they launch into the air towards Kusagaker. Land of Grass Poison Research Lab. It had taken longer than they thought to find the research lab due to the overgrown foliage that acted as a natural defense. The lab itself was a simple building that appeared very similar to a small apartment complex in design. All right, you two, you're on from here on out, said the blood clone before he disappeared into the foliage. The two Jinchuriki looked at one another before nodding and jumping away towards the research lab. They stopped on a branch overlooking the lab, but still well within the shadows and out of sight. So what's the plan, Naruto? Asked Gaara, having no problems taking orders from his brother. Naruto looked at Gaara in mild surprise. What? Why are you asking me? Gaara just gave him a deadpanned expression. You are the more experienced of the two of us, also you hold the most powerful of the 9 Biju and will become the most powerful of the Jinchuriki. You are an obvious choice to be the leader of not only this mission, but also the rest of the Jinchuriki when we are all together. If you say so, Gaara, Naruto said with a shake of his head, before refocusing on the lab and the shinobi guarding it. It seems there are about 8 or so guards, all of them appear to be Chunin level. But they most likely have a way to communicate with the village if they need reinforcements. Our best bet at getting this done is to take them all out at the same time and quickly detain the scientists so they can't call for help either. Gaara nodded in agreement and was about to move his sand to take out the guards but was stopped by Naruto. Gaara, don't. Your sand will be easily noticed and we don't know if they have reinforcements waiting inside either. We can't make a move against them without knowing everything we absolutely can about them. That was the first thing Jiraiya-sensei taught me, to know everything you can about your enemy and to make sure they know nothing about you. We weren't given a deadline to complete the mission, so we don't have to rush into anything unprepared. For now we'll split up and scout the area for potential traps while my summons and clones infiltrate the lab. Flipping through the familiar hand signs for summoning, Naruto slammed his hand on the ground and in a poof of smoke, 6 small rats appeared, each with a tiny level 1 Rinnegan in their eyes. Turning to his fellow Jinchuriki, Naruto formed a familiar cross-shaped hand sign. Meet back here once you're done scouting, we'll plan our next move from there. Gaara nodded before jumping off to search, Shadow Clone Jutsu. 5 more Narutos appeared in a poof of smoke. You know what to do, said the original as the 5 clones nodded before jumping away. Once he was alone, Naruto sat down in a meditative position, his eyes closing as he prepared to test a theory about the Rinnegan, or to be more precise, his animal path. Chakra began to leak from his closed eyes as he focused on the link he felt with each of his animal summons. Slowly he began to open his eyes, only to find himself staring at the research lab. But something was different. The lab seemed to have more than quadrupled in size along with the shinobi guarding the outside of the lab. Running over to small puddle near the base of a tree, Naruto looked at his reflection and was mentally jumping around in excitement. He did it. His theory was correct. He had managed to transfer his consciousness to one of his summons. Staring back at him from the surface of the water was the small reflection of a rat with a tiny Rinnegan in its eyes. Now, to finish the mission, thought Naruto as he scampered away towards the research lab. It didn't take him long to find a way into the lab. The outside of the building was slightly run down and had a multitude of small openings for his new rat body to squeeze through. It also helped that the Chunin guards seemed more interested in their game of cards than actually keeping watch over the lab. Man, why is it that most Chunin assigned to guard something are lazy as hell? Thought Naruto as he shook his head at the attitude that seemed to appear in almost every ninja he had seen. His thoughts were interrupted as he found himself in a shadowed corner of the lab. Focusing some chakra to his paws, he quickly scaled the wall and hid in some shadows on the ceiling. Not like I even need to bother hiding in the shadows, these guys wouldn't notice me even I were to walk right in the front door and start shouting at them. From his vantage on the ceiling, Naruto could see just about everything there was inside the lab. The inside of the lab was just one big room with the only doors in sight being those for what he assumed was a restroom and a heavy metal door that no doubt led to the vault. 7 scientists were scattered all around the lab, some taking notes, others mixing different substances together. On the far wall from the main door was a radio transmitter that was no doubt used to communicate with the village in case of emergencies. We need to take out that transmitter before they have a chance to call for help. Taking another quick glance around the room, Naruto focused on his real body and soon found himself looking at the outside of the lab from his place on a tree branch. Whoa, said Naruto as he stumbled slightly as he stood up, that's going to take some getting used to. After righting himself and refocusing on the task at hand, he began use the optical link of the Rinnegan and began to see things from his clone's point of view. Alright, that hatch on the roof will work as our entrance point. Now all I have to do is wait for. His thoughts trailed off as the red-haired Jinchuriki landed next to him. Gaara, so what did you find? Gaara shook his head slightly. No traps of any kind, and no reinforcements or patrols in sight. I guess Jiraiya-sama wasn't kidding when he said this was one of the more minor research labs. There's hardly any kind of security around this place. Yeah, you're right. From what I found out, there's only 7 scientists here and no other shinobi inside waiting as backup. Also, they do have a radio to communicate with the village, but it's on the far wall away from any of them. Once we eliminate the guards, we'll enter through the roof, and from there we can easily destroy the radio and interrogate the scientists once they're restrained. Gaara nodded in understanding and turned to focus on the Chunin guarding the lab. I'll take care of them. Ready your sand to restrain the scientist once we enter, said Naruto as he gave a quick mental command to his clones and pulled out 2 kunai. Stay close, he said before he started running up the tree they were on, Gaara hot on his heels. Once they reached the top, Naruto jumped off towards the roof of the lab. Gaara raised a non-existent eyebrow in surprise but followed nonetheless. Once he was airborne, his brother's plan became obvious. All of his clones had done the same thing they had, and with a few quick flicks of the wrist, they threw their kunai down on the unsuspecting Chunin. Not wanting there to be any chance of someone surviving, Gaara condensed some of his sand into shuriken and launched them at the Chunin as well. The guards never knew what hit them. 6 fell to the kunai and the remaining 2 were impaled by the sand shuriken before they had a chance to react. With the guards out of the picture, Naruto dispelled his clones and focused on altering the gravity around the 2 to soften their landing. Their descent began to slow and soon the 2 landed on the roof of the lab with a soft thud. Nice work with the gravity, said Gaara as they moved towards the hatch on the roof. Thanks, and good follow-up with the sand shuriken, that saved us a lot of trouble, said Naruto as he bent down and grasped the handle on the hatch. Ready. Gaara nodded. Do it. With a quick jerk the hatch was opened and the 2 9-year-old shinobi jumped down into the lab, shocking the scientists inside. Not wasting any time, Gaara sent his sand out to restrain the scientist while Naruto launched a small Kaiden jutsu to destroy the radio transmitter. Once that was taken care of, the 2 shinobi moved towards their captives. Now, I'm only going to ask this once, said Naruto as he pulled out a kunai and put in at one of the scientist's throat. Tell us everything there is to know about this place. For a moment no one said anything. They all just stared at the 2 children that had single-handedly taken over their lab. Getting annoyed with the stares, Gaara tightened his sand around them while Naruto dug his kunai into the scientist's neck, drawing some blood. That broke the captives out of their shock and they began telling the 2 everything. Once they knew everything about the lab itself, Naruto sent 2 clones to check the vault and the other door in the room. To their surprise, the vault was extremely large, taking up about a quarter of the entire space inside the building. All along the shelves were vials, beakers and a few crates, each with a poison inside it of varying colors. On the back wall were all of the notes on how to make the poisons, as well as notes on their effects from past experiments. Creating a few more clones, Naruto sent them to begin sealing everything into scrolls for transport back to the hideout. The clone that checked the other door was even more surprised. Instead of the restroom they had been expecting, it turned out that the room was the storage room for all of their ingredients. Not willing to let anything be wasted, Naruto also sent some clones to seal everything in there as well. Once they had everything they needed, Naruto dispelled his clones and took out a few small pieces of paper. The papers each had a seal on it, and in short work, the young blonde had one of the seals placed on each of the scientists' foreheads. Gaara raised an eyebrow at the seal tags. Since when have you been able to make seals? Naruto merely gave his brother a light punch on the shoulder. I didn't make these, Jiraiya-sensei always keeps a good stock of seals handy in case of emergencies. These particular ones I nabbed from his room at the hideout. Gaara simply brushed the punch off but gave his fellow Jinchuriki an incredulous look at that last part. You took those from Jiraiya-sama's personal stash. You do realize when he finds out he's going to rant and rave, right? This time it was Naruto's turn to brush something off. Yeah, he probably will, but given the circumstances I'll think he'll make an exception. Gaara merely shook his head at his brother's attitude. Anyway, what do these seals do? They're mind-erasing seals. Jiraiya-sensei created them to help out with his infiltration missions. If he were ever caught, he would just stick one of these the person's head and erase their memories of him, which is what I'm doing right now, said Naruto as he formed the ram sign. The seal's tag began to glow a dim blue while all of the scientists' eyes glazed over before they slumped over, unconscious. Now that that's taken care of, let's report back to Jiraiya-sensei's clone. Our first mission is officially complete. A blur sped across the calm landscape that was the forests of Land of Fire, its movements not even disturbing the tiniest of leaves. Damn it, Tsunade. I thought I was supposed to be the best at covering my tracks, thought Jiraiya with a half smirk, half frown. It had been 3 days since his search for Tsunade started, 3 days of searching every casino and gambling hall he could find with almost no trace of the slug Sanin anywhere. The only decent lead I have on her right now is that she is definitely in Land of Fire, which isn't helping. Screamed the toad sage in his head as he stopped on branch to try and collect his thoughts. Okay, calm down Jiraiya, getting worked up over this isn't going to help, he thought as he took a few calming breaths. Once he managed to get control over his emotions again, he began to go over everything he knew about Tsunade, and what she could possibly be doing in Land of Fire, one of her least favorite places on the planet, second only to Konoha. Alright, with her personality, no matter how much she hates a place, she could never deny someone medical help if they asked her. That's a possibility, but a slim one. No one would search out Tsunade unless they knew for a fact she was near enough to help, thought Jiraiya, mentally moving that option to the back of his mind. If she isn't healing someone, then what else could possibly draw her back to Land of Fire? The only thing I can think of would be a huge gambling score. Jiraiya's eyes shot open as he reached into his red vest and pulled out a small book and started flipping through it. How the hell could I have forgotten about that? There's no way she would ever miss a chance like that, said Jiraiya out loud as he continued to mentally curse himself for forgetting. Finally stopping on the page he was looking for, Jiraiya read over the page before snapping the book shut and resuming his sprint across Land of Fire. I got you now, Tsunade. There's no way you could resist the call of Tanzaku Guy's jackpot lottery, whispered Jiraiya with a triumphant smirk on his face as he sped up, not wanting to waste any more time in finding his old teammate. With Konoha's tracking squad, god damn it, still nothing, mumbled Ukami Inuzuka as he and Sum continued to sniff the air around them with their partners doing the same. Shibi, any news from your bugs? He asked turning to the Aburame head. Shibi stopped on a branch, his teammates halting their progress as well. Placing his hands in the ram seal, the Aburame took a moment to focus his chakra before placing his right hand on the surface of the branch he was on. Secret jutsu, insect gathering. The other members of the tracking squad watched on as a web of chakra spread out from Shibi's hand, vaguely reminiscent of a spider web. Nothing seemed to happen for a few seconds before several termites burrowed their way out of the tree branch. Shortly following the termites, multiple insects ranging from a simple beetle to the deadly tarantula started to gather around Shibi, silently feeding off his chakra as payment for the knowledge they were giving him. After a few minutes of silence, Shibi silently ended the jutsu after thanking the insects for their help. Turning to his current team, Shibi raised an eyebrow slightly when he saw the famous Shisui Uchiha twitching slightly. Is something wrong, Uchiha-san? He asked in typical Aburame fashion, monotonous. This got Ukami and Sum's attention as they looked over at the youngest member of their team. Sure enough, there stood the famed and feared Shisui of the Shunshin, standing rooted on the spot, his body twitching at random. Shisui tried to retain his calm, cool Uchiha mask as he turned away from his team and continued on the way they had been moving. The three Junin heard a faint, "I am not the biggest fan of spiders," before the dark-haired youth jumped away. In his wake, he left behind two shocked Inuzukas who were having a hard time picking their jaws up off the forest floor. Shibi merely raised his other eyebrow to join the first in the Aburame equivalent of shocked. Ukami was the first one to recover and had to shake his head a few times to clear it. "You, correct me if I'm wrong, but was that prideful Uchiha speech for, 'I'm shit-faced scared of spiders'?" Sum and Shibi could do little more than nod in agreement with that statement, before they all jumped off to catch up with their teammate. Though they seemed calm on the outside, on the inside each one was cracking up at the little tidbit of information they had just discovered. Getting control of his inner laughter, Ukami turned to Shibi, a silent question in his eyes. Nodding in acknowledgement that he understood, Shibi began to recount what he had learned from the insects. It seems Tsunade passed through here not long ago. Many of the insects remember seeing someone who matches her description as well as feeling an immense chakra within the person. According to what they told me, she and a traveling companion of hers were heading in the direction of Tanzaku-gai. Tanzaku-gai, huh? Not surprising. That place is known for its casinos and gambling halls. With a gambling addiction like hers, she probably frequents the place. The other three Konoha shinobi nodded in agreement with Sum's statement and changed course slightly in the direction of Tanzaku-gai. Tanzaku-gai Lucky Dragon Casino. Sitting at the end of a poker table, a half-empty bottle of sake in front of her was none other than Tsunade Senju, the famed slug princess of Konoha. Sitting next to her was her apprentice Shizune, holding her pet pig Tauntaun. It had been 2 days since they had arrived in Tanzaku-gai, and in that time Tsunade had done nothing but gamble and drink. However, instead of living up to her title as the legendary sucker, she had won about of the times she gambled. Normally when she won so much money in one place, it usually foretold disaster in some shape or form. But this time was different. When she won her first large pot at the tables, when she arrived, she was ready to hightail it over to Land of Grass, but when she lost the next few rounds, she dismissed it as one of her random fluke wins. That was how the last 2 days had gone for her. She would win a couple of large pots, but then she would lose the next few hands before repeating the process. Shizune was of course thrilled that her master was winning, so anytime they won some money, it was another debt that was paid off and one less person chasing after them for money. But still, thought Tsunade as she discarded 2 cards and picked up 2 more from the dealer, why can't I shake this feeling that something isn't right? Looking at her hand one more time, the feeling she was having grew a little more. Placing her royal flush on the table, Tsunade watched as the dealer pushed all of the chips in the pot over to her. Something is definitely wrong, thought the slug Sanin as she added the pile of chips to the ones she already had, the entire stack worth over 200,000 yen. Shizune, were live, she was interrupted when a spotlight appeared on the stage and the casino manager walked up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the time you all have been waiting for is finally here. It's time to announce the winning numbers for this year's Tanzaku-gai jackpot lottery." Every patron in the casino cheered loudly at the announcement. Tsunade slowly pulled her lottery ticket out of her jacket and looked at the numbers she had chosen, 6112927 and her bonus number 51. She turned her attention back to the stage when the manager started talking again. "All right folks, the first winning number is 6. He said after picking a random ball out of the mixer. A chorus of loud groans followed this as people ripped up their useless tickets. "The second number is 1. What? I got the first 2 numbers right," thought Tsunade as a feeling of dread started growing inside of her. "The third number, 12. 3 numbers right." Tsunade was starting to shake slightly, catching her apprentice's attention. Now Shizune may like it when her master wins some money, but even she couldn't ignore the fact that whenever Tsunade won something big, it always meant trouble was coming. The next one, 9. Shouted the manager to even more groans of disappointment. Oh no, thought the two medics simultaneously. Please, please don't let the next number be a 27. The two medics' hearts almost stopped when the manager told everyone the last number. And last but not least, the bonus number is 51. This time their hearts really did stop, even if it was only for a split second. Tsunade couldn't believe that she had the winning ticket to the 300 billion yen jackpot. That was more than enough to pay off her debts and allow her and Shizune to live the rest of their lives happy. It took a whole 5 minutes for the two medics to get over their shock, but the second were able to move again, they were out the door and moving to the village gates as fast as their legs would carry them. No, 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 this isn't good, we have got to get out of here before something disastrous happens. Thought Tsunade as she pushed as much chakra as she could into her legs to increase her speed, Shizune not far behind her. Once they cleared the walls of the village, they wasted no time in jumping into the forest surrounding them and moving towards the border of Land of Fire at speeds that would have Might Guy impressed. An hour after the two medics left Tanzaku Guy, they felt it was safe enough to slow down and continue at a much more sedate pace. But just as they were stopping, a red and white blur shot past them and stopped on a branch a few yards in front of them. Still riled up from earlier events, Tsunade immediately fell into a defensive stance, her right hand glowing with green chakra. Shizune was only a split second slower than her master, putting Tauntaun on the branch next to her and readying her hidden Senbon launcher. Before either of the Kunoichi could make a move, a small chuckle came from the person standing in opposite them. Now Tsunade Heim, is that anyway to greet an old friend and comrade? Recognizing the voice, Tsunade lowered her guard slightly and actually took the chance to get a good look at the person in front of her. Jiraiya, what the hell are you doing here? She asked bewildered. Unable to resist some playful banter with his former teammate, Jiraiya put on a face of mock hurt while placing his hand over his heart. You wound me Tsunade Heim, can't an old friend drop in and reminisce about the good old days with one of his closest friends? Said the Toad Sage, trying and failing to hide his amusement. Recognizing what her old teammate was doing, Tsunade's look of shock was immediately replaced with a frown and a small glare. Cut the crap baka, what are you doing here? Before her teammate had a chance to answer, Tsunade's mind momentarily jumped back to the winning lotto ticket in her jacket pocket. Tsunade immediately jumped to the first conclusion that made sense. If you're here to try and convince me to return to Konoha, then forget it. Tell that old fool of a cage that trained us that I don't want anything to do with that place. Of all of the responses Tsunade, and to an extent Shizune had expected, the one they got was not what they were expecting. Instead of getting slightly miffed at his teammate for insulting the Sandame, the man Jiraiya considered a father, said Toad Sage just started to give a dark chuckle. So you don't want anything to do with that traitorous bastard either? Good, that should make the reason for this visit all the easier, he said, shocking Tsunade and Shizune to the core. Wah, what do you mean Jiraiya-sama? Asked Shizune, her shock at the turn of events leaking into her voice. Jiraiya merely chuckled again before looking the two women in the eye, all traces of his happy and aloft personality gone. He betrayed me, was the Toad Sage's simple response, though the malice in his voice was plain for all to hear. Now if Tsunade and Shizune thought they were shocked before, then apparently they didn't understand what shocked meant. It was well known throughout the elemental nations that the Sandame Hokage was one of the most kind-hearted people on the planet. Some would even go so far as to say that he was too kind-hearted, letting people off with warnings and giving one to many second chances. To hear Jiraiya, a man who almost worshipped the Sandame when he was younger, speak of the man in such a way was overwhelming to say the least. Still struggling to understand what the hell was happening, Tsunade spoke up in a shaky voice, what do you mean Jiraiya? How did Sarutobi-sensei betray you? Jiraiya's eyes hardened at the mention of his old teacher's name. Never, he spat, mention that bastard's name in my presence again, Tsunade. Tsunade actually took a step back at the tone in Jiraiya's voice. Seeing the effect his attitude was having on his former teammate, Jiraiya took a few breaths before continuing. Tell me, Tsunade, did anything happen about a year or so ago? A huge gambling score maybe. It took a moment for Tsunade to recompose herself, but once she had some control over her emotions, what Jiraiya said caused her eyes to widen. Seeing his teammate's reaction, Jiraiya let a small smirk cross his lips. I take it something did happen, am I right? Yeah, Tsunade said slowly, we were in the land of tea. I won a huge pot at the poker tables that nearly paid off half of my debts. Tsunade trailed off slightly as her mind went back to that day, how ecstatic she had been at winning so much and how terrified she had been for the next few weeks afterward. But what does that have to do with anything? Everything, said Jiraiya. Tsunade, every time you have ever won a large amount of money gambling, it always seemed to happen before something disastrous happened, whether it affected you or not. That pot you won in the land of tea was no different. 1 year ago, the Sandaime assigned 6 of his shinobi a mission to assassinate someone. They failed. Though they were told to assassinate the person, that was not the true purpose of the mission. The true purpose of the mission was to force the target to awaken a Kekkei Genkai long thought to be nothing more than myth. Tsunade's eyes widen in understanding, her mind flashing back to times during the Second Great Shinobi World War. Shizune, though, had a look of confusion on her face. What Kekkei Genkai are you talking about, Jiraiya-sama? Jiraiya glanced at Tsunade and noticed her wide eyes. Turning back to the younger medic, his tone was eerily calm. A Kekkei Genkai of unmatched power, the one that completes the triad of dojutsus known to the world, the eyes of the sage of the 6 paths himself, the Rinnegan. Shizune's world came to a crashing halt at what she had just heard. She may have been young, but even she knew the stories of the revered shinobi, a man who many believed was nothing more than legend. While her apprentice was trying to come to grips with the information she had been given, Tsunade turned her still wide eyes to Jiraiya. Who? Was all she could say as her voice betrayed her. Jiraiya met Tsunade's gaze. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. What? Screamed Tsunade as her mind was on information overload. She knew that Minato and Kushina were expecting, but she was too far away to reach them to help with the birthing at the time. When she had learned that both Minato and Kushina had died sealing the Kyuubi into a newborn Naruto, she sank into even lower levels of depression. That was the day she had vowed that no matter what, she would never return to Konoha, the day the last bit of happiness was taken from her. Are you saying that that bastard tried to have Naruto killed just to see if he would awaken the Rinnegan? At Jiraiya's nod, the feared slug Sannin lost all sense of control on her emotions and delivered a super-powered chakra punch to the tree she was standing on. The poor tree didn't stand a chance. The second Tsunade's fist made contact with the bark, the entire top half of the tree was launched into the trees surrounding it, resulting in a domino-like effect. Once he was sure it was safe for him to speak again, Jiraiya continued, Tsunade Haim, he said, his tone softer and more caring, Naruto hasn't known the love of a mother since he was born, though it won't get rid of the scars in his heart, maybe the love of a godmother could at least make them easier to bear. Tsunade's rage, which had been steadily growing the more she thought about what her former sensei had done, was quickly replaced by hope. Hope that she finally had a chance to atone for her mistake of not trying to care for Naruto when he was younger. Looking into her teammate's eyes, Tsunade nodded in agreement, take me to him. Letting a small smile cross his lips, Jiraiya motioned for them to follow him. Don't worry Tsunade, you'll be able to see him soon. But before that, we have some other business to take care of. The 2 medics gave the white-haired Sannin a look of confusion, but before either of them could voice their thoughts, all 3 of them were forced to jump out of the way a large fireball. The 3 startled ninja quickly made it to a nearby clearing and waited for their attackers to show themselves. They didn't have to wait long as 6 blurs jumped from the forest in front of them and stopped a couple yards in front of them. The group of people before them was not what they were expecting to see. Ukami, Sume, and Shibi were by far the most skilled trackers in Konoha's ranks and easily recognizable to anyone. The last member of the team was the one that surprised them the most. The boy may not have been any older than 16, but he was already a recognizable shinobi inside of Land of Fire. Shisui Uchiha, one of the 2 rising geniuses of the Uchiha clan, stood facing 2 members of the former Sannin with absolutely no fear, or any emotion for that matter, visible on his face. As the leader of the team, Ukami was the first to speak. Damn, so much for getting her to come willingly. Oh well, I always did like a challenge. Tsunade Senju, by order of the Sandaime Hokage, you are to return to Konoha with us at once. Once we have returned, you will face trial for associating with the S-ranked rogue ninja, Jiraiya. Tsunade merely raised an eyebrow at that last bit. S-ranked rogue ninja Jiraiya, with your skills I would have at least expected you to be given the SS rank. Jiraiya merely chuckled at Tsunade's statement while he slid into a loose fighting stance. Hey, don't blame me, I'm not the one who assigned the ranking, but that's beside the point. Come on, let's take care of these guys so we can get back to business. Not needing any more prompting, Tsunade and Shizune both fell into their own stances as they prepared for the fight about to begin. Opposite them, Ukami and Sume both got into the basic Inuzuka stance, their partners at the ready beside them. Shibi made no outward sign that he was ready to fight, but unlike most, everyone in the clearing could tell he was already planning out a few strategies. Shisui slipped into the Uchiha Interceptor Taijutsu stance, his fully matured Sharingan shining in his eyes. Neither side moved, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Holding true to their clan's tendency to be impatient, Ukami and Sume were the first ones attack. With a dual shout of, "Passing Fang," the patriarch and matriarch of the Inuzuka clan launched themselves towards their opponents, each spinning like a drill. I'll take care of these 2, I'm the most advanced in taijutsu out of the 3 of us, said Tsunade before she jumped towards the oncoming attacks, both her index fingers extended. Swinging her arms up, the slug Sannin sent the 2 Inuzukas flying almost perpendicular to the ground. Before she had a chance to follow up on her attack, Tsunade was forced to avoid a pair of jaws that would have ripped her right arm clean off, courtesy Shiromaru. Damn mutt, why don't you just keel over like the mongrel you are? Bringing her leg up, Tsunade slammed it down onto the head of the white wolf-like dog. Instead of the crunching sound of the dog's skull shattering, Tsunade's attack was met with a log splintering into thousands of little pieces. What the hell? How can a ninkin use a substitution like that? Thought Tsunade in surprise. Looking over to where the 2 Inuzukas had landed, Tsunade was met with the sight of 2 Ukami Inuzukas charging her with their claws at the ready. Ducking under the swipe of the Ukami on her left, she used the opportunity to deliver its side kick to one on her right. It was only thanks to his innate animal instincts and reflexes that spared Ukami from being bisected at the hip by the legendary strength of the slug Sannin. Damn it, how the hell did she know I was the real one? Thought Ukami as he and the transformed Shiromaru regrouped with Sume and Kuromaru. Almost as if reading his thoughts, Tsunade answered his unasked question, your clan's man-beast clone technique won't be of much help against me. In case you forget, I am known as the greatest medical ninja of all time for a reason. I can sense out a fading chakra signature 100 yards away among the corpses of countless shinobi, telling the difference between a human and a transformed mutt isn't that hard. Damn, muttered Sume as she knelt next to Kuromaru, she's right, and with one of our clan's most effective techniques pretty much nullified, defeating her is going to be twice as hard as we thought. Ukami merely nodded in agreement, his eyes never wavering from his opponent. Yeah, but we have the advantage in numbers, and that is our clan's greatest weapon. Our ability to work and fight together is unmatched by any. Sume smirked at her husband's words. He was right, a single Inuzuka and their partner could easily fend 10 foes alone. With two Inazukas and the two most powerful Ninkin in the Inazuka clan, their chances for winning were looking pretty good. Shiromaru and I will move in first, you and Kuromaru attack when you see an opening, after that we'll overwhelm her and capture her. At his wife's nod, Ukami and the transformed Shiromaru charged back in, fully intent on winning the fight no matter the cost. With Jiraiya and Shizune, stay back and let Tsunade and I do most of the fighting. Hang back and provide support if you see an opening, got it? Said Jiraiya, getting a quick nod from the young medic. Once Shizune was clear, Jiraiya turned back to his opponents and immediately charged in with taijutsu. Going for Shisui first, the Toad Sage jumped to deliver an flying spin kick to the young Uchiha's head. Living up to his reputation, Shisui used an almost instantaneous shunshin to dodge the attack. Expecting as much, Jiraiya threw a few shuriken in the direction he sensed Shisui's chakra signature appear. Shibi, taking advantage of the rather large opening Jiraiya left in guard, pulled his right hand out of his pocket and a swarm of Kikaichu engulfed the Toad Sage. Unfortunately for Shibi, the Jiraiya his Kikaichu had attacked disappeared in a poof of smoke. Shadow Clone, when did he? The Aburame head's thoughts were cut off as he was forced to dodge a barrage of mud balls. Turning in the direction the attack had come from, Shibi saw Shisui appearing above the mud dragon head before cutting it half with his wind-infused Tanto. With the dragon head destroyed, the two Konoha shinobi quickly moved back to back, not willing to risk a surprise attack from the Toad Sage. Before either of them had a chance to react, well over a dozen elongated tongues broke through the surface of the ground and wrapped around them. Shisui wasted little time in escaping from his bindings with a shunshin, appearing a few feet away from the still-bound Shibi. Bringing his Tanto up, the young Uchiha channeled his wind chakra into it and prepared to free his comrade from the tongues. Before the teen had a chance to make his move, Jiraiya jumped out of the ground in front of him, a spinning orb of chakra in his hand. Rasengan, said Jiraiya as he shoved the ultimate technique of shape manipulation into the Uchiha's gut. Shisui was sent flying across the clearing from the force of the impact, his flight only ending when his back collided with a tree with a sickening crunch. Turning to his still-trapped opponent, Jiraiya began preparing another Rasengan when an all-too familiar popping sound came from behind him. Whirling around, the Toad Sage noticed the last bits of smoke dissipating from the Shadow Clone dispelling. Damn that brat and his cursed eyes to hell, thought Jiraiya as he turned to face his captive just in time to see his summons dispelling in puffs of smoke and Shisui appearing in front of him. Thanks to his years of battle experience, Jiraiya was just able to avoid having his head removed from his shoulders by the Uchiha's wind-infused Tanto. Deciding a small retreat was in order, Jiraiya used his own shunshin to appear next to Shizune at the edge of the clearing. Are you alright, Jiraiya-sama? Asked the medic as she did a quick diagnostic jutsu on him. Yeah, but this turning out to be harder than I expected. Shibi won't be a problem, I just have to get him to stand still for a few seconds, it's Shisui that's going to be difficult. With his Sharingan he'll be able to see most of my attacks before I have chance to make them, said Jiraiya as he observed the two Konoha shinobi who had regrouped. But something's off about that kid, Jiraiya said, more to himself than anything. What do you mean, Jiraiya-sama? Other than that initial fireball he used in the forest, and his few shunshins, Shisui hasn't used any jutsu at all during the fight, said Jiraiya while Shizune's eyes narrowed in suspicion. You're right, but what could he gain by not using any jutsu against you? Mumbled Shizune as she focused her chakra and used her abilities as a sensor to feel Shisui's chakra levels. The medic's eyes flew open when she felt the massive amounts of chakra that the Uchiha was gathering in his eyes. Jiraiya-sama, be careful, he's sending an incredibly large amount of chakra to his eyes. He might be planning on using some kind of genjutsu. Jiraiya stayed silent for a few seconds as he factored that piece of information into his battle plan. Thanks, Shizune. Be ready. When I give you an opening, use the deadliest poison you can produce and cover all three of us with it. But you could die as well, Jiraiya-sama. I can't do that. That's an order, Shizune, said Jiraiya, his tone leaving no room for argument. Don't worry about me. Just make sure you catch them with your poison fog, got it? Shizune nodded in understanding. Though she didn't like the thought of putting an ally in danger with her jutsu, she knew that Jiraiya wouldn't have told her to use it unless he had a plan. Before any more could be said, the two ninjas saw a large swarm of Kikaichu closing in on them from the surrounding forest. Going through hand signs at a rate that even the Sharingan couldn't follow, Jiraiya grabbed Shizune as his hair grew and formed a dome around them. Now it's my turn, thought Jiraiya while going through another chain of seals. Ninpu. Needle hell, he whispered, causing the dome of hair to start firing off countless needles that shredded the incoming Kikaichu. Crap, I used over a third of my hive with that attack. I'll have to be careful, if I lose any more like that I'll be in trouble, thought Shibi, his facial expression never changing, despite the worry he felt. Shisui-san, said the Aburame, catching his comrade's attention, we have to be careful. For some reason the Kikaichu I planted on the three of them don't seem to be having an effect. If this keeps up, a tactical retreat may be our only chance of survival. The teen nodded his head in agreement, though his eyes never wavered from Jiraiya and Shizune. I agree, but I have one more ace I can play. All we need to do is restrain Jiraiya long enough for me to activate my jutsu. Easier said than done though. If I move any more chakra into my eyes, Tsunade or that other medic are bound to sense it and warn Jiraiya. I only hope Ukami and Sum can keep Tsunade busy long enough for this to work. With Tsunade, this is really starting to get old, thought a frustrated Tsunade as she dodged yet another drill-like attack. But before she had a chance to retaliate, she was forced to jump away to avoid being turned into a pin cushion by a hail of kunai. Okay. No more kid gloves, mumbled the slug Sanin before going through a short chain of seals. Once she finished her seals, she charged towards her four opponents, her hands glowing aglow with green chakra. Oh shit, Sum move, said Ukami when he noticed the chakra surrounding Tsunade's hands. Both Inuzukas managed to jump out of the way in time to avoid the chakra scalpels. Unfortunately for Kuromaru, he wasn't. Bringing her right arm down in a wide arc, Tsunade's chakra scalpel sliced clean through the optic nerves in Kuromaru's right eye. Not letting up in her assault, Tsunade brought her left hand around and sliced the dog's left ear clean off his head. Before she had a chance to continue her attack and deliver the finishing blow, she was forced to break away from the dog lest she be shredded by an enraged Ukami's claws. Kuromaru, screamed Sum as she ran to her partner's side and began applying the limited medical knowledge she possessed for a quick field patch job. While his wife was tending to her injured partner, Ukami and Shiromaru, now back in his normal form, were staring down a smirking Tsunade. You'll pay for that, you bitch, growled Ukami as he started gathering his remaining chakra all around his body. Using the link all Inuzuka's pairs had, Shiromaru began gathering his own chakra and mixing it with his master's. Tsunade's eyes widened in shock as she felt the growing chakra inside of the two. The amount was so great it was even starting to form an aura around the two. Sum looked up from the injured Kuromaru at the feeling of her husband and Shiromaru's chakra. She knew all too well what they planning. It was this very technique that made her husband and Shiromaru feared throughout the elemental nations as the twin wolves. Ukami and Shiromaru's chakra flared around them as the Inuzuka patriarch went through a chain of seals. Once he finished the hand seals necessary for his technique, Ukami's features started becoming even more feral than they already were. His already sharpened nails elongated into full-grown claws, his bones realigning themselves into a skeletal structure similar to that of a canine's. His hair elongated and became wild and unkempt, but the most striking change was his eyes. His already dilated canine pupils stretched and formed into a full-blown slit with the look of hungry predator staring down its prey. The newly transformed Ukami let out a howl reminiscent of a wolf along with Shiromaru before initiating the final phase of his jutsu. Man-beast combination transformation. Double-headed wolf. Ukami said, his voice almost a growl, before the chakra around him and Shiromaru started to swirl and envelop the two in a large column of smoke. Oh shit, cursed Tsunade as she looked at what had become of her opponent. Gone was the feral visage of Ukami Inuzuka and his partner Shiromaru, and in their place was something that would haunt the dreams of any civilian or villager that saw it. A snarling, two-headed wolf stared down on the Sannin with murderous intent. Its shining white fur glistened in the sun, accentuating its blood-red eyes. With Jiraiya and Shizune same time, Jiraiya's eyes widened as his head whipped around in the direction Tsunade was fighting the two Inuzukas. Shit, if Ukami's planning what I think he is, Tsunade won't be able to stop him with her homophobia. Glancing back at the two Konoha shinobi he was fighting, he saw their attention was also on the other fight as well. Shizune, use your poison Senbon on Shibi now, whispered the Toad Sage urgently, bringing his teammates' attention back to the fight at hand. With a quick nod, Shizune pulled up the sleeve on her right arm and quickly launched the 5 Senbon at the stunned Aburame. Reaching into his red jacket, Jiraiya disappeared in a blur of speed towards the young Uchiha. Thanks to his Sharingan, Shisui managed to see the attacks coming. Shibi-san, move, he said as he jumped away from Jiraiya. Not needing to be told twice, Shibi jumped to the side to avoid the incoming Senbon. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the Aburame head wasn't fast enough to avoid all of the Senbon as two found their mark in the left side of his chest. Reaching to remove the needles, Shibi's body suddenly froze as he listened to what his Kikaichu were telling him. Poison, he thought as he directed the remaining Kikaichu in his body to isolate and destroy the poison, only to realize the process was much slower than usual and the poison was spreading fast. My hive isn't large enough to fight the poison effectively, I have to get back to Konoha as fast as possible. Shisui-san, I've been poisoned, my hive isn't strong enough to fight it alone, I have to retreat, he said as he started making his way towards the forest. Go, I can handle this, said Shisui as he continued to dodge Jiraiya's attempts at getting in close. Tell Hokage-sama what's happened and have him send reinforcements. Nodding in understanding, the Aburame head retreated into the forest surrounding them and started in the direction of Konoha as fast as he could. Seeing that one of the threats had been dealt with, Jiraiya decided it was time to finish this little game of cat and mouse. Moving in close, he engaged the young Uchiha in taijutsu, looking into his eyes on purpose. Come on, show me the rumors were true, show me this advanced Sharingan of yours. Now's my chance, thought Shisui as he sent more chakra into his eyes, revealing his most powerful weapon, the Mangekyo Sharingan. The 3 tomos of his normal Sharingan spun around wildly before finally merging into the form of the Mangekyo. A 4-pointed pinwheel with a small dot in the center, stared back into the eyes of the Toad Sage as Shisui activated his most powerful technique. Koto Amatsukami, thought the Uchiha as his Mangekyo began to spin and the veins around his iris became more prominent. Jiraiya's eyes glazed over for a split second before they returned to normal and he stopped his attack on the teen. Shizune was surprised when she saw Jiraiya quit attacking the Uchiha, but her surprise turned to horror when he turned towards her and began to form seals for a jutsu. Shisui smirked slightly behind Jiraiya at the look on the young medic's face. It was entertaining to watch people's reactions when their comrades suddenly turned on them when he captured them in his genjutsus. But this time was different. Instead of temporarily confusing his target with a regular genjutsu, he had truly taken control of the legendary Jiraiya of the Sannin. I may not be able to use my Mangekyo for a long time, but it was worth it, thought Shisui as he continued to silently alter Jiraiya's thoughts to make him think Tsunade and Shizune were his enemies. Just as Jiraiya was about to finish the hand signs for his jutsu, Shisui felt someone appear behind him and something being slammed into the base of his skull. What the, was his last coherent thought before darkness overcame him. Behind him, the real Jiraiya dispelled the clone that had fallen into Shisui's ultimate genjutsu and pulled out a scroll to seal away the body. So the rumors were true. Shisui did awaken a stronger form of Sharingan, and it apparently allows him the ability to completely take over another person by altering and controlling their thoughts. A technique like that could be useful. Tsunade and Orochimaru will have to look into unlocking its secrets by examining the body. Placing the scroll back into his vest, Jiraiya nodded to Shizune, letting her know everything was fine. Before either of them had a chance to do anything else, a howl echoed throughout the clearing, reminding them they weren't quite finished yet. Shit! Shizune, get to Tsunade! Shouted Jiraiya as he sped towards the newly transformed Ukami and Shiromaru. Shizune was quick to follow the order. Rushing over to her master, she arrived just as Jiraiya appeared in front of them. Biting his right thumb, Jiraiya smeared the blood on his left hand before speeding through 5 very familiar hand signs. Summoning jutsu, said Jiraiya as he slammed his hands on the ground. In a large poof of smoke, the 3 ninja felt themselves rise into the air as the large summons appeared below them. Fang Wolf Fang. Ukami's disembodied voice echoed around the clearing as the giant 2-headed wolf jumped towards them, spinning at speeds that were impossible to match. Gameiken, defense, shouted the Toad Sage as the strongest technique of the Inuzuka clan sped towards them. The magenta-colored, guardian toad, quickly brought his shield around to block the attack and dug his Sasumata into the ground as added support. Speeding through another set of seals, Jiraiya clapped his hands together as a large, intricate seal appeared on Gameiken's shield with 10 circles surrounding it, 2 with kanji in them. Toad collaboration. Shield of Hachiman. The seal on the shield began to glow a vibrant blue as a dome of swirling chakra enveloped the large toad. The transformed Inuzuka pair collided with the shield of chakra, pushing Gameiken back a ways, but not breaking the shield. Jiraiya struggled to maintain the shield under the ferocious and unending assault of the 2-headed wolf. Every time it failed to break the shield, it would bounce off and come in again from a different angle. Shit! I can't keep this up for much longer, thought Jiraiya as he was forced to a knee after another failed attempt by the wolf to break the shield. Watching as the still spinning wolf came around for another attempt, Jiraiya feared that this time he might actually break through with this attack. Just as the wolf was about to collide with the shield again, Jiraiya felt 2 pairs of hands on his back. Glancing over his shoulder, the Toad Sage felt his chakra reserves begin to rise as Tsunade and Shizune transferred their own chakra to his. Pumping his newly replenished chakra into the jutsu, Jiraiya smirked as he watched the twister once again fail to get through his and Gameiken's defense. Now it's our turn, thought Jiraiya as he made 3 quick hand seals and the chakra dome around them dissipated and reformed around the edge of Gameiken's shield, tripling its size. Already knowing what his summoner had planned, Gameiken raised his shield so it was pointing towards the oncoming attack. Toad collaboration. Mirror reflection Fang Wolf Fang. The chakra around the shield stopped spinning and unknown to all but Jiraiya and Gameiken, the kanji for wolf appeared in one of the empty circles surrounding the seal. But what everyone did notice was the chakra around the shield picking up speed again. 3 sets of eyes widened in complete shock as they watched an exact copy of the attack heading towards the giant toad launched from its shield. The identical Fang Wolf Fang attacks collided with each other, creating a shockwave strong enough to level a good portion of the surrounding forest. Unable to maintain the technique, Ukami and Shiromaru broke off and cancelled their jutsu, landing in a crouch a little ways away from Sum and the still-down Kuromaru. With wide eyes, Ukami watched as the exact copy of his best technique dissipated back into chakra before vanishing entirely. Gameiken, return to Mayuboku, I can't maintain the summoning anymore, panted Jiraiya as he and the 2 medics jumped from the toad's head. Nodding in understanding, the guardian toad disappeared in a poof of smoke back to his home, eager to tell his brothers about the latest technique he added to his shield. No sooner had the smoke cleared than did Ukami and a transformed Shiromaru appear in front of them, claws poised to strike. Reacting faster than either of her teammates, Tsunade jumped to meet the Inuzuka patriarch, her hands once again glowing with green chakra. Blinded by rage and fatigue, Ukami failed to notice the chakra surrounding Tsunade's hands. Taking a swing at the slug Sanin, he left himself open to a counter, and unfortunately for him, Tsunade capitalized on it. Thrusting her open left palm into his chest, she hit him right over his heart. Ukami's eyes widened as he felt his heart being destroyed by the chakra scalpel. Time seemed to slow for him, and he felt his chakra and his life force leaving his body. Glancing over at his faithful companion, he had just enough time to see Tsunade chop Shiromaru in the throat, effortlessly cutting his windpipe, a killing blow. Well pal, looks we finally met our match. I just hope Sum manages to survive. I'm sorry Hana-chan, Kiba, I guess I won't be coming back like I promised. With those last thoughts, Ukami Inuzuka fell to the ground next to his partner, never to rise again. Sum could only watch on in denial as her husband and mate fell to the ground alongside Shiromaru. Her world stopped as she continued to stare at the lifeless body for what seemed like an eternity. She was too stunned to notice that the same person who had just killed her husband was moving to finish her as well. Fortunately for the Inuzuka matriarch, Kuromaru managed to somehow get her onto his back and retreat back towards Konoha. It wasn't until after they had covered about half of the distance to Konoha that Sum finally came out of her shocked state. Now that she could think properly, the fact that her husband was truly dead sank in, and she let out an agonized cry that echoed throughout the forests of Land of Fire. Now what do we do? Asked Shizune once she and Tsunade were finished healing the minor case of chakra exhaustion that Jiraiya had suffered. The lifeless bodies of Ukami Inuzuka and Shiromaru lay where it had fallen, temporarily forgotten by the three ninja still in the clearing. Now, said Jiraiya as he slowly got to his feet, we can get back to the whole point of me tracking you two down. There is a mission that I have to complete, and I'm going to need your all's help with it. The two medics looked at Jiraiya curiously as he moved over and placed a small piece of paper on the bodies of Ukami and Shiromaru before sealing them into the same scroll he had Shisui. What mission is that, Jiraiya? Asked Tsunade as she picked up Taunton and moved to stand with her teammate. Jiraiya couldn't keep the smirk off his face as he imagined their faces once he told them what he and Naruto were planning. The mission is to infiltrate Takigakure and retrieve the Jinchuriki of the Nanabi no Kabutomushi, said Jiraiya with as straight a face as possible. The task proved too difficult though, as he collapsed laughing when he saw the faces Tsunade and Shizune were giving him. Both kunoichi had apparently dislodged their jaws as they were currently on the ground, with their eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Composing herself as best she could, Tsunade turned her still wide eyes to the laughing form of Jiraiya. You're not serious about that, are you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jiraiya's laughter immediately stopped when he heard the question his teammate asked. Recomposing himself, Jiraiya turned his attention back to the two medics, his eyes reflecting the seriousness of the matter. Yes, Tsunade, I'm dead serious. I won't go into detail about things, because it is not my place to do so, but once we find the final member of our team and complete this mission, I'll take you to Naruto and he can explain everything to you in detail. That said, Jiraiya jumped into the surrounding forest, the two medics hot on his tail. What do you mean, final member of our team? Who else do you plan on having join us? Asked Tsunade as the three ninja continued heading north. Jiraiya looked over his shoulder at his teammate, his infamous smirk spreading across his lips. Why, Orochimaru of course.